Can I welcome members, officers and the public here in the well, it's not the gallery anymore. I think everybody's got used to putting gallery here at the back of the room, or watching on the webcast to today's meeting of the Budget and Performance Committee. Please can you make sure that your electronic devices are switched to off or to silent mode to avoid any unnecessary interruptions this morning. No, it's this afternoon now. We were told we couldn't have the meeting this morning because TfL was in here, and of course they won't. So that's why we had to move to this afternoon. Can I start by asking our clerk, Paul Goodchild, if any apologies have been received?
Thanks, Chairman. Apologies from Assemblymember Fortune. Assemblymember Rogers is here as substitute, and Assemblymember Duval is attending remotely today. Yes,
and it's very good to see you back, Glenn. Very, very, very happy to see you. Okay, thank you. Now, declarations of interest. Can I ask the committee to note the recommendations set out at item 2? I'm asking if any other members have interest to declare. I know Assemblymember Duval has. Assemblymember Duval. Right, you're not coming out. We can't hear you.
Chair, can you hear me now?
Yes, loud and clear.
Chair, can you hear me now?
Yes. Yes. No. Okay, I'm going to do his declaration for him.
Thank you. I'm not sure to declare. I think I'm a seasoned.
Right, okay, we've clearly got a technical problem there. Len Duval is just going to tell us all that he is a season ticket holder of West Ham, just to make that absolutely clear, as he can't. Okay, any other declarations from colleagues? No. Thank you. Can we note the completed and ongoing actions arising from previous meetings of the committee? Thank you very much. And we now move on to our main item of business, which is a discussion on the 2022-23 GLA Group Budget, Mayoral Development Corporations, which is the LLDC and the OPDC. We have two panels this afternoon. I would like to welcome our guest on our first panel, and you're from the LLDC, which I know you know, Jerry Murphy, Executive Director of Financial, Commercial and Corporate Services, and Lynn Gardner, our Chief Executive. So good afternoon, both of you. I'm going to start the questioning off, and I'll start with Lynn, if I may. What has been the biggest challenge in putting together your 22-23 budgets?
Thank you, Chair. You can hear me. The microphone's popped on.
We can. If I can ask all of you to talk further into it, it's not like City Hall. Please.
Is that better?
That's much better.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, lovely. Chair, in addressing that question in terms of your challenges, is there time for a little bit of an opening statement to give an overview of where we are financially and in the park?
Briefly, and if you stick to the finances as it's a budget meeting.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I think the first thing I'd like to say is I think we can be extremely proud that nearly 10 years on, we are delivering the most impressive Olympic and Paralympic legacy project in modern times here in London. The IOC released a promotional video this year. It features London as an example of successful legacy regeneration. Our project has cross-party support. It was promoted by all three mayors of London. It remains fully supported by government, who recently helped with COVID costs at East Bank. There's much to do, and we're presenting a budget for the next 3 years. The important thing, of course, to remember here is these are the last 3 full years of the Development Corporation. We're heading to transition. So they're an important 3 years for us and for our examination here today before we hand the planning powers back to the local boroughs at the end of 2024. There have been a number of financial challenges. We've been able to deal with the bulk of those from last year's savings, but there are some further challenges in the coming years that we want to discuss with you today. I'm sure you'll bring them out. We are taking quite a prudent approach, and you'll probably see that in the questions and answers. East Bank has stayed on track. East Bank Construction, finance-wise, has stayed on track for the past year, indeed programme-wise too.
I think, can I interrupt you? We are going to go through specific things.
The specific areas.
Perhaps we can pick up.
You can, yeah, no problem.
Let's do that. And if at the end of the questioning there's anything we haven't brought out that you particularly want
I'll point to it.
say,
yeah,
then
lovely.
you can put to us. I think that's better, colleagues, don't you?
No problem at all.
Okay, so if I go back to my original question, what has been the biggest challenge in putting this budget together?
The biggest challenge is probably been coming out of the COVID-19 recovery. So we've seen some little bits of really good activity like landing, Aber Voyage, and getting better trading income from 3 mills. But we have not seen total recovery yet in our venues. And of course, we still, during 2021, had some significant financial pressures around the stadium because we were not able to run summer events in 2021. So we are suffering from that in this period. That's also, Chair, affecting something I know that is really close to the Assembly's heart, and that is our ability to secure stadium naming rights, which is...
Oh, we're going to come on to that, believe
Yes,
you me.
fine, no problem.
You and I have discussed that on many occasions, and I'm hoping for some very good news from you today on that, but let's leave that till later.
Yes.
In the meantime, I hear what you say about putting the budget together, but the draft budget is predicated on expecting pre-pandemic visitor numbers to the park. 6.2 million in 2022-23, which is paragraph 9.6. Do you think that's a realistic expectation?
I'm hesitating because of where we find ourselves currently with the current variant, but all things being equal, I think it's realistic. In fact, I think we will, in a good year, exceed that in 22-23. We have a new student population coming to the park at the back end of 2022. So I think we'll see an increase, but it remains challenging from where we are right now.
Well, you said you'd been prudent. I hope you don't wish in future meetings that you hadn't said that, because obviously we'll pick up on that. I was surprised by that, because looking at it, to us, perhaps it doesn't look realistic, but if it absolutely does to you and you're still being prudent, then that's a good thing. Jerry, at our budget meeting last year, you confirmed that despite the impact of the pandemic, you were confident the LLDC would generate 225 million in business rates and council taxes by the end of the 2030s. Are you still confident of this, and can you explain what assumptions that figure is actually based on?
Yeah, we did indeed, and I think you asked the question about what the sort of COVID impact on rates would be on that long-term rates and council tax model, and we did rework the model, and we're still confident in that outturn. It is we look at all of the movements since 2012 within the area and look at planning. Applications in trade, so what planning applications have been approved, and that's the basis of the model that we put forward. So we took your kind of question on board, and we did re-look at that model over this year.
Okay. Lynn, your revenue is primarily generated through park operations and the fixed estate charge. But without the developments, there is no revenue. Your transition is expected to take place in 2025. You mentioned that right at the beginning. To what extent will the park be financially sustainable in 2025 when development is set to be completed in the early 30s?
The park will not be sustainable in 2025. There is a budget gap in terms of sustainability. One, because we will not have realised the full effect of the fixed estate charge because we won't have finished the developments. But our aim overall is to become sustainable, putting the stadium aside, obviously, which is special circumstances. We are aiming to become financially sustainable once the developments are complete. So for us, within our boundary, that is 2032.
We've done 2032?
Yeah.
Okay. What is the actual annual income from the fixed estate charge? And what is the annual income expected to be in the early 2030s when everything's completed?
Would you like me to pick that up? The current annual income is around 2.6 million. In the budget period, that rises to over 3 million. And remember, in the budget period, we've got East Bank coming online, and those East Bank partners will contribute to the fixed estate charge. By the mid-2030s, as Lynn said, 2022, 32, 33, around the mid-2030s, we get the peak of fixed estate charge. And in today's money, I think in today's money, that's around 8.5 million in today's money. Obviously, it's incremented each year by inflation, so it's probably around the 11 or 12 million mark at that point.
Okay, why have you made the decision to retain the East Bank retail units? Because you were going to sell them off for capital receipts, weren't you?
Yes, so the original funding plan for Stratford Waterfront retail was that we would sell them as soon as they were completed to a sort of shell and core. In discussion with our investment committee, it was felt that we should retain those. It's a small number. We actually deferred 8 million of receipts from our model out of the budget period. We should retain those units to build placemaking, and over time, of course, there'll be capital appreciation on that. So when they eventually are disposed of, and I believe that's in the back end of the 2030s, early 2040s, they will have appreciated somewhat in capital terms, and we will have had a revenue stream for that period of time. But critically, placemaking in that very, the East Bank site is the premier heart and hub of the park.
So, sorry, what sort of income from will be generated from those that income stream? The retail units.
The
retail units.
The retail units. Yes, we still expect to get the. We still expect to get the capital receipt.
Yeah, but that's in time
the rental
to come.
income.
Yeah, the rental income
is around 400,000 a year.
Okay.
From yeah.
And you're confident about that, are you?
I think we've looked at all of the other retail around the park, and I think there has been good take up on retail around the park. So I think we can be confident that we will build a good rental stream there. There is always risk with new. There's always a period of time when you need to get tenants in and get them through rent-free periods, etc. But yes, I think these will be important retail units on a premier site.
So how many empty retail units are there on the sites?
I think there's 11 retail units in total along the Stratford waterfront, but of course we're still building. We're still building those out, so they won't be built out until.
What percentage of would you say is empty of the total?
Chair, these are units that are part of the East Bank development that's not yet completed. So in design terms, we're expecting there to be 11 units.
Yeah.
So they're not empty at the moment because they're not built yet.
Right, okay. I thought that there were some that were built. They're not.
No, they're coming forward as part of the East Bank construction. Okay. So we won't see completion of those units until beginning of 2024, probably, maybe a bit later. We have all of the public realm to complete outside of all of the buildings.
I think at some point we need to visit, because those of us that live in completely the opposite end of London don't get to go down. Well, no doubt we will soon, whether we want to or not. We'll be in the area.
You'll be on our doorstep.
Yes, I'm afraid we will. Anyway, so we have to bear that. Jerry, the GLA has increased the LLDC's £520 million borrowing limit to £550 million from 24-25, and your budget assumes that even this will be exceeded by around 10 million. At our budget meetings last year, you said the LLDC was running a £100 million surplus in terms of repaying the GLA loan back. What's the surplus this year?
The surplus over the long term has reduced slightly from that position. Last year, when we looked at the increase last year's increase on East Bank, we had a diminution in the receipts from Eastwick and Sweetwater, one of our development sites, and we had additional borrowings to accommodate the equity investment in the Stratford waterfront residential. That there was an additional amount of grant, and the increase in borrowings was one of a number of measures to accommodate that. We are 10 million over in 25-26, but we think that over time there will be shifts and we'll be able to manage that out. In terms of the overall, the model is still very positive. We have had some reduction in forecasts of land values, but we are in procurement at the moment, most particularly for the Stratford waterfront residential joint venture. So we're overall content that those dips, which I think Lynn talked about the impact of COVID on this budget, and it has been challenging, not just in the venues, but also in the long term in reductions in house price inflation, plus also in a kind of more cautious approach by valuers to the value of the park. So we believe our model has sort of dipped a little bit, reflecting that, plus also reflecting increases in construction cost and reflecting changes in affordable housing policy. But the model is still positive, and we do believe that we can manage out that 2025-26 borrowing peak.
Thank you. What level of capital receipts are you expecting after 25-26?
Oh Lord, I would have to confirm. I'd have to after 25-26. I'd have to confirm that.
Would you?
Yeah.
That's fine. If you haven't got it to hand, if you could confirm to the committee.
The balance in the I'd prefer to confirm it actually.
No, that's fine.
Yeah.
That's fine. What is the tipping point in terms of when any increases in the cost of delivering the East Bank and the remaining developments would cause this surplus to disappear completely that I was referring to earlier?
So the model is predicated on quite a long-term view about the value of land, the value of our development land, and it's based on the increasing value of the land once it's developed, and our sort of development appraisals. So we are forecasting quite a long-term. We are forecasting quite a long way out. So I think there are elements of the model that we update it every year. We look at our forecasts. I don't think there's a tipping point in terms of how much would costs have to grow versus how much of income. It would be quite a difficult thing. The model is holistic, looking at all of the development assets and the borrowings to be repaid. I mean, if there was a catastrophic dip in the housing market, we would still expect over time housing to come back. So it would impact the model, but this is a model that goes out to as Lynn said, the developments aren't built out until the mid-2030s.
Have you done any planning for catastrophic events?
We do scenario planning we do sensitivities on our model. And it's very sensitive to house price inflation and construction inflation because of the length of time of the model. But we update those assumptions every year and test them. We're content that the borrowings are repayable, and we do that exercise very transparently with the GLA, because both myself and David Galley have to be content that the borrowings are repayable.
Okay, fine. Just one other question on this section. Then you mentioned that the government had given you money for the COVID situation. Exactly how much money have you received from the government?
It was about 17 million.
That's right.
Yes.
17 million.
So some of that is not all due to LLDC stroke GLA. It's some of it will go to UAL because they contribute to 2/3 of the cost of their building. So there's a net amount that comes back to us.
Yeah, that's
Comes back to the GLA effectively.
Okay, can you put that in writing to us as well when you're
Yeah, of
writing
course,
back with
yeah.
some of the information? Lovely, thank you. We're now moving on to affordable homes delivery, and Assembly Member Russell is going to start on that.
Thank you, Chair. And I just wanted to circle back to the retail units on the East Bank with a supplementary, if that's okay. I just wondered, with those 11 retail units, you talked about placemaking, and I just wonder how much, whether you've got an element that relates possibly to the recovery, where you think about social value that that tenants might provide, and therefore might actually get people in on lower rents, but in order to stimulate more rent in other units. And I just wondered if that's part of your thinking.
definitely the thinking around the placemaking is that there will be a mix of retail units, and the development team feels very strongly about that, particularly if you look at the totality of, you've got Westfield, but you've also got retail units up on the new developments at Chubham. East Village has got retail units. Along here east on Canal Bank, there's quite a kind of mix also of different types. So not necessarily all high street. There's a mix of local businesses, and we've done that also on the existing food and beverage units on the park recently with Timber Lodge and some of the kiosks. So we will definitely be looking at a mix as part of that placemaking.
That's really reassuring, because particularly for the local community, if there are small businesses that are opening up, if it's possible to give them an affordable way of starting a business, that's really helpful. Anyway, the main questions are on the affordable homes delivery, and I will just move to the right page. So between 2014 and 2020, just 23% of completed homes have been affordable, which is down from 28% in 2016. So what percentage of all completed homes across all sites do you expect to be affordable?
Do you mean at the end of the project?
I think yes.
Yeah, so the target's about 33,000 altogether by 2036. We're about a third of the way through with that 11,500. This is across the whole MDC area, as you say. And you're right, 23% are currently affordable, falling into the affordable category. As far as permissions are concerned, there are 13,000 units that have received permission. Many of these are historical permissions. Well, obviously, they're all historical permissions. In fact, over the last year, 2021, we've started to really see the higher levels of affordable coming through in line with the Mayor's new targets. So we're starting to see virtually all developments that are coming forward for residential permissions reaching the 35%. But what's very difficult to predict right at the moment is when those ones with permission will be on site. There's still a remaining 10,000 homes to come forward to meet that target. So 11,000 now, 13 in permission, and then there's the rest to meet the target, nearly another 10,000. We would expect all of those to meet the affordable targets at the moment at 35% going forward. Over the whole, again, difficult to predict because some of them are not in for permission yet, but we're thinking that we'll be somewhere between 25 and 30% affordable over the whole, given the historical permissions. I've got a really good example here because in 2021, 1,400 new homes were completed, but only 345 were affordable in those completions. And again, it's down to historical permissions. That's 23% as well, actually, for that single year. But what I understand, I'll give you an example of what's dragging that down. There are some really large sites within the MDC area that had permissions some time ago. So one of the ones that you might point to is Sugarhouse Island. It's a big site. It got permission from the London Thames Gateway in September 2012, so before LLDC's planning committee was up and running. And it's only delivering 11% affordable across the entire site. So some of these large sites, really historical permissions, are dragging the overall numbers down. It's good to see that we're picking that up now from in recent years until hopefully the end of the project. If we were to concentrate just on the homes that we control, so within the LLDC land area, we've so far built 963 in those new neighbourhoods. This is not including East Village, so leaving that out because that was built before LLDC came along. That is 42% affordable right now in terms of the homes that have been built. We'll be at 1,500, just under 1,500 by transition in 2025. And of those, we expect 36% to be affordable. And then by the end of the programme in 2032, we will have built 5,800 homes, and we're expecting a minimum of 40%. And 64% of those will be 2-bed plus. Mm-hmm. So it gives you a sense of the area we've got more control over, and then the area that's got historical planning permissions and is part of our planning regime, but is a little bit more difficult to predict because it's not our land.
Yep.
Yeah.
Do you think there's a problem with with affordable homes being pushed to the end of construction, and then the programme gets re-evaluated, and then the affordable homes are less viable? Is that adding to your problems?
No matter what happens here, we have to hand the planning powers over at the end of 2024, and that's a fixed date. On our land, all of our developments will have outline planning permission by that date, with intentions around the affordable housing fixed. But if there are reserve matter applications coming forward for future phases of housing after that date, we will not be determining those applications because there will not be the MDC in the way that we understand it today. Those determinations will be made by the borough planning teams. And the same goes for any outline planning in the wider MDC area that has not yet got detailed planning and is not on site, so to speak. So yes, developers can vary permissions afterwards, but they will be going to the boroughs from the beginning of 2025 rather than to the MDC. Does that make sense?
That does make sense. So that's clearly a risk
Yes.
in terms of delivery of the affordable
Yes.
proportion of homes. How confident are you in the borough planning teams to be robust about the mayor's targets toward, the mayor's asking for 50% affordable?
I feel very confident in the boroughs and the political control that we have today. So our biggest partners are Hackney and Newham. All of the developments that LLDC are yet to build out are in Newham. Their local affordable housing targets are more stringent than ours are. So at the moment, I'm very happy with that. And looking forward, I can't really see how that would change dramatically from the current mayor's affordable housing targets. Of course, the regime at City Hall can change as well from 2024 onwards.
Of course. What about the challenges to increasing the affordable level of completions from the 23%, getting
Yes.
that up? What do you think the key challenges are?
Probably in viability, as you've identified,
Yeah.
and we're in very uncertain times right now. Nevertheless, we're really pleased that over the past 18 months or so, we've managed to squeeze a bit more affordable out of Eastwick and Sweetwater, going from 31 to 34%. And when you're talking about 1,800 units, that's a reasonable number of units. And we've also managed to get a similar increase, I think it was 31 to 35 at Chobham Manor, through getting some extra units in there. And fantastically, the vast majority of them, some 90%, are social rent units.
Those are social rent rather than shared ownership?
Yes, they're rented units, so they've gone to nominations to the local boroughs, particularly to Newham.
Because that's another one of the issues with the affordable homes.
Yes,
the shared ownership can actually end up being not such a great deal.
That's right,
people.
and a lot of these historical permissions even on our land, but certainly in the MDC area, are shared ownership affordable products. Yeah, what we're trying to do is, where we can, if there's any extra cash or any extra viability hanging around, certainly for our developments, we're pushing it over to affordable rent. Indeed, we have an agreement with the GLA that we will build 50% affordable on the remaining sites in our control, and if there is any flexibility at all in any extra cash coming forward, then it's to be loaded into affordable rented properties. So there's a bias towards that, because the permission that we got in I think it was April 2019 now for East Bank is a 30-70 split in favour of affordable. Where, really speaking, everybody would have liked to have seen more like a 60-40 split. So we've agreed with the Mayor that we will, where there are any opportunities, we'll load it in favour of affordable rented properties.
Thank you, Chair.
Turning that on, sorry. Before I bring in Assembly Member Sahota, Assembly Member Duval wants to ask something. Let's hope this works then.
Okay, can people hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you. Just going back to the completions, and thank you very much for the way that you have answered the questions. But I've got a graph in front of me about completions, which I'm not sure if it tells me the full story, or certainly the commentary I've got next to it. So, of course, Assembly Member Russell referred to the 23% in the first quarter of 2020, I think it would have been there, because it's only part. Isn't the story from 2014, and I know you're not responsible for that, is that we would have front-loaded some of the historical affordable earlier on in those developments, because that's the nature of it. The affordable sometimes comes first, not at the end of projects when they start. Is that the story where it starts at 36 in 2014 and then comes down on to 23? Is it because it's front-loaded and most of the affordable is done at the beginning? And then secondly, I suppose the historical approvals is the real problem here, isn't it? Because I'm not sure if we are treating up on pairs. We tend to look at the OLDC's legacy is including the pre-period when you weren't in existence. And I just want you to comment on that and how you deal with that. And then finally, in terms of scrutiny, should I be worried about completions or should I be worried about starts? And actually, I think that presents a different story in terms of where we are, not a downward trend of 23, albeit I don't think that tells me a bad story. It just tells me where we are at this particular time. That starts is a good story. Is that not correct in terms of the figures that we've got?
I think
under your watch.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think if I start with the last question, I think probably starts is a good position, but I don't have the statistics in front of me, and it would be good if we could circulate those so people could see the completions and the starts and get a fair summary of what's going on. So I can arrange for that. I think the Assembly member makes a good point on the historical planning permissions. I've specifically asked about this one because it looked so low at 23%. This Sugar House Island is an amazing example of how the figures can be really dragged down over time, which is a real shame. And it's an old permission. Obviously, large development sites get built out over many phases, over many years. And in between times, we've had ups and downs in the economy and the market, which slows development down. You are right to point to the front loading of affordable housing back in 2014, because, of course, when the Athletes' Village was built, because those figures include the Athletes' Village, the ones that you're looking at there, and the Athletes' Village was a bit of really quite a visionary project, really. It was 50% affordable rent and 50% private rent. And I have to say, it's a fantastic exemplar community. It works really well as a community down there. But we did front load, I'm saying we, the royal we, I wasn't here, but there were decisions made at the time to front load affordable on the Athletes' Village. Of course, since then, mayors change, policies change, and so on, and different things happen. Sometimes, just in terms of front-loading affordable housing, sometimes we see a lot of that happening in a bad market. So we saw a lot of it in 2007 and 2008 when we had the markets crashing. We took the opportunity here in London over many sites across the city to use government money through the GLA to front-load affordable housing so that we could ride the market, if you see what I mean, because developers were not willing to take the risks, but we could bring affordable forward. And often that happens in bumpy times, depending on whether there's cash around from the government, obviously.
Okay, thank you. Are you happy with that, Assembly Member Duval? Lovely, thank you. Let's move over now then to Assembly Member Dr. Sahota. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just to pick up on this, the theme, what's the time gap between giving the average probably of giving permission for a project and it materializing? Because I mean, a lot of these completions are different from the startups, aren't they? Because there's a time lag. What's the sort of time lag that happens?
It really depends. It really depends. So I'll give you a good example of our own sites. So our sites already have outline planning permission, and they got that permission in 2012. So there's already an indication of what we might do with those sites. We've seen policy changes since then. So, for example, in the outline permissions, we were expecting to see somewhere in the order of 30% affordable housing. But because we've got new policy through a new administration, we've revisited that. And when we've brought forward what we call reserve matter applications, which are more detailed planning applications, many years later, we're now crystallising them into the current policy framework. So a lot can change between an outline planning permission and something that then comes forward for detailed planning permission, which is why I wanted to make the distinction of where we will be in 2025, because it's not without risk. We will have outline planning, but we will not have gone through all the reserve matters. And the economy can change and policy can change during those times.
Yeah, and this is by maybe the explanation of why we've seen this decline from 36% in 2014 to 28, so it's 23% now.
Yes, it will be a whole range of things. Length of time between original position, reserve matters, detailed applications, but also ups and downs of policy and how much money is in the market. So if developers, they may wait until they may land bank and wait to bring their developments forward, depending on each set of financial circumstances. And of course, in East London, one can see why this could be quite prevalent because it's grown over time. And there's no doubt that people would have been able to enter the market years ago and pick up land cheaper than it would be worth today, for example. So you can see how those dynamics happen in an area that's growing over time and becoming more and more successful. Does that make sense?
Yes, of course. And at what point can we expect to see the level of affordable completions to improve? When do you think this happen? If the affordable completion... I'm not sure if I was on the mic. At what level do you think, or in time, do you think we'll see the increase in the number of affordable completions taking place?
It depends, actually, because, as I say, there are 13,000 permissions already sitting there and about 10,000 still to come. Let's say we got the vast majority of those 10,000 into planning before we folded the MDC. It then depends on how those developers bring forward those developments. So the later ones are likely to be higher levels of affordable, but there are always routes through revisiting planning that the earlier ones could take, which we won't have control over after 2025. And indeed, if they did come forward, they're historically quite low and affordable. So I think it's going to be bumpy between now and 2025, and then bumpy right until the end of the period. So we'll have a mix of things going on.
I mean, I'm about to ask you to look into the crystal ball, right? But
well, my estimate earlier was that at the end of the day, we'll end up somewhere between 20 and 30% affordable across the whole, because we've got a lot of historical permissions that are under 30% affordable in this area.
Okay, and you've previously stated that 5,774 homes to be completed by LDC owned land, and 40% to be affordable. How much extra would it cost to achieve 50% affordable homes as per the mayor's target for public land?
Well, that depends on a number of factors. It depends, firstly, on the tenure mix of those 10,000 affordable. Did you say 10%? Yeah, the extra 10% affordable homes. So another 10% affordable is what? 600 homes, say. The GLA set currently grant levels for each home, and we'd need to sit down and work that out with the grant team. So there's you get a certain amount of grant for a shared ownership unit, and more depending on the more affordable the home is, if you see what I mean. So, but it would be a substantial amount of money, I would suggest. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I'm not used to turning this back on again. Assembly Member Pigeon, I've just got a question, but did you want to come in on the back of that, or do you want to wait? You're next.
Actually, we've started just quickly. We're just discussing about additional information. I'm wondering whether in this table you're going to provide to us with the breakdown of permissions, whether you could provide a clear understanding of shared ownership, intermediate rent, social rent, and if there's any other type of affordable housing, just so we can really understand the picture and where that housing is, just so we've got something a bit more complete.
Yeah, we could put a table
sort of
together.
To date and going forward, what you anticipate.
On the park.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That would be really
Yeah,
helpful.
we could do
That's what I wanted to pick up. Thank you.
Absolutely right, and that fits into what I was going to say. I mean, there's been a gradual uptick in the proportion of affordable housing projects applications approved within the LLDC lands in the past few years, and I'm disappointed, and I'm sure everybody is, that it's not actually translated into improving the proportion of affordable homes completed. That is disappointing for sure. So we're now moving on to the East Bank. Just to confirm, though, if you'd send those figures that have been asked for, that's a very good idea. Assembly Member Pigeon. Right, Assembly Member Pigeon is leading on the East Bank questions. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you very much. Now, to start off with, I just wanted to see whether you can give us a clear, so we're all on the clear understanding of escalating costs within East Bank. So can you clarify the original base cost of the project? Because we've got so many different figures
Yes.
that are given to our committee, government, the mayor in the full business case. I could read them all out, but could you give us a clear understanding what was the original base cost and perhaps where you are now?
Yeah, I think I'm going to ask Jerry to do this because she's more over it than I am.
Thank you. The original, and we've probably added, we've tried to be more transparent in the reporting of East Bank, so we've included additional pieces in the monitoring, the quarterly reports that we produce. And actually, we did go back to try and clarify. We went back to the final business case to government. So that, in our minds, is our starting point. And I'm talking about the construction programme. So the programme for UAL, BBC Sadler's Wells and V&A and the public realm on that East Bank site. And the original cost of that was 471 million, and we are now at 628 million. Now, the Mayor doesn't fund all of that increase. Some of that increase is funded by partners, because some of them share cost risk, particularly, most notably UAL. And also we got, as we mentioned earlier, we got an increase in income from the government in respect of COVID in 1920, one of the 2021. 2022.
Okay, so so it's gone up in total 628 million, but not all of that.
157 million. It's gone up from 471
yes.
to 628, which is an increase of 157.
Yes, it's gone up 157, yes, but the total now is 628 million, but some of that is coming from partners such as UAL and the government, and you're going to be able to provide us with that broken down.
Absolutely.
Lovely. Absolutely. Okay, just so we're all on the same page, I think that's really important. And where are we with this East Bank construction? I mean, I've been out to visit. It'd be great if other members want to. I have to say, I think it's a really exciting development, and it's going to transform the park. But what percentage of the construction has been completed, and when are you expecting it to finish?
Okay, well, the bit that we were focusing on just there with the FBC and the current budget is to do with Stratford waterfront element. There's also the UCL element, which is being totally funded by University College London, and that indeed is the first element to open. So their Pool Street building will open first. That is a small amount of academic space and some student accommodation. And that will open this September, this forthcoming September in 2022. It's the first part of East Bank to open. It will be followed in 2023 by the London College of Fashion, again in time for the academic year, and UCL's second building, which is known as Marshgate. LCF, London College of Fashion, are bringing around 6,000 students. We're expecting in the first instance between 500 and 1,000 students at University College London. So expecting the dynamic on the park to change rather a bit. By Christmas, we will have opened Sadler's Wells Theatre 2023. Yeah, for the Christmas programming. We will have handed over the Victoria and Albert Museum during 2023, but then the V&A will go in and do their own fit out, and that does take some time and could take as long as around 18 months to 2 years. We're looking at ways that we might be able to pull those timescales back hand in glove with them. And the BBC is more likely to open at the BBC we think will hand over probably early 2024, and then they again need to do some fit out in their studios. So I think they're likely to open later on in 24 or perhaps as late as 25. So the academic institutions coming forward first, together with Sadler's Wells.
Yeah, and then it's the V&A and BBC at some point 24, 25.
Yes, the V&A Storehouse, which is the new home for the V&A archive, is being built in Here East. And that's an independent project that the V&A are running, and they are also opening that building in 2024. So they'll have the museum on the waterfront and the V&A Storehouse, which will be completely open to the public. Hundreds of thousands of articles that haven't previously been seen by the public will be available in that building.
And in terms of, so that's the timetable for when we're expecting the different bits of the project to be completed. How far has construction got so far? What percentage?
Well, 2 buildings have topped out, UCL and LCF. So UCL has topped out at Marshgate, which is its building that's opening in 2023. The London College of Fashion, University of the Arts London, London College of Fashion has topped out as well. We are topping out at the V&A next week, I think. And Sadler's Wells was following shortly. BBC's a little bit behind.
So what, we're halfway through?
40% on construction.
Yeah.
Is still sorry for interrupting, but 40% on construction. There's still, we will continue to design until probably about mid next year, I would say. We're a much higher percentage forward on design, but it's about 40% on construction.
That's brilliant, thank you. And what level of capital receipts are you anticipating from the eventual sale of East Bank?
So in terms of the land, so we've already completed disposals of land to UCL and UAL. East Bank is fundamentally a net cost. Both the BBC make a contribution and UAL make a contribution, but East Bank is an investment over time. East Bank is an investment, and we won't be getting disposal proceeds as such. We've dealt with the retail, but that's a small element of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
We have had some receipts from UCL, haven't we?
UCL and UAL. I don't know whether it's in the public domain, but it's circa 80 million. So, and this should be in our accounts for last year, I believe.
Okay, but are there any other anticipated capital receipts?
So when we build out, we're out to market at the moment for a joint venture for the tip end of the site, which is where we'll build residential and a small amount of retail, but very small amount of retail. So fundamentally, the tip of the site that's currently got programme offices on it will be put into a joint venture, and we'll develop in a joint venture partnership. We hope to conclude on that procurement in March or April of next year. We're waiting for bids to come back in, probably at the back end of this year or early January, actually. So the receipts from those will also be due, and will also form part of the funding.
They help cross-subsidise the
cross-subsidise,
Stratford waterfront development, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Now, you've clarified 628 million is the figure we were agreeing on. You're not expecting, are you, the cost to increase further? How confident are you of that?
We're as confident as we can be, as I said last time, as we stand here now. So we've managed to set that budget last year. There's been we're not asking for any more budget this year, so that's the first bit of good news. The project is fairly stable. It still has some way to go, however, and there are a lot of risks in terms of a construction project of this nature right now. So we have to complete the procurement. Thankfully, that's nearly complete. We're just completing the public realm. We've got a couple more things to do, and then we'll be over the hill. The investment committee signed off a large one for the public realm yesterday, and there are some small ones following, and then we're out of procurement, which is fantastic. So the procurement risk will largely fall away. We still have design integration risk here, and we're a little bit behind on design, which means that we've got conversations going on with our architects and the subcontractors to sort out a number of issues there. Obviously, these are costed in terms of risks. We have package interface management to think about. So the way this building is happening is that each of the elements is being built by often different subcontractors. So ensuring that the window frames fit into the facade and so on means that people have to be constantly looking at design integration across the site. So that's a risk, and that will continue for some time, the package interface, until 2023. So that will be sitting there. We have to commission and hand over these buildings, and that's we have to complete them to Shell and Core to the satisfaction of the partners, and get them handed over so that we hand over the risks to them in terms of their fit out and so on. So that's a big risk as well. We'll have to get into that in 2023. And of course, something that we're hearing a lot about at the moment is supply volatility. So materials, labour, COVID implications around that, countries in Europe closing their borders, closing factories and so on. Our windows from Schneider are coming from Germany, so we're constantly watching the materials market. We're doing as much storage of materials on site as we possibly can. We work with subcontractors to test whether they've got their materials on site, whether they've got their supply chain safe and so on. But there's quite a lot of volatility in that space as well. So, you know, sitting here today, we would say we're happy with where we are today. But there are lots of risks in a major construction project like this where we are running the project ourselves, essentially, in the public sector.
Yes, huge numbers of risks there that you have clearly identified and you'll probably have on your risk register. How are you managing them to ensure costs don't increase, particularly with the supply chain issues and materials? You know, suddenly, I don't know, isn't there an aluminium shortage at the moment or something, and therefore Windows production is delayed? You know, how are you managing that? Because that could fall back on the taxpayer.
So this one is something that Jerry and I have been looking at in really some detail in the past couple of weeks. We've just got a report out of Mace. I meet every subcontractor once a month in a directors meeting, and we hear informally what's happening, but we've really started to formalise that now around materials and labour, because it seems to be one of the more risky areas. So we've got a report out. It's not perfect. It's got some way to go to give us total confidence. And this is about really drilling down with every single contractor about their level of comfort in their supplying material. So we're not there yet, Caroline. We've got a way to go with that.
Well, that's work in progress, and it's very alive.
It's a really important piece,
Okay, and then my final question, which you're going to write to us with, is this breakdown of the 628 and how much is coming, as it were, from the Mayor and from other sources.
Yes.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you. Assemblymember Rogers.
Thank you, Chair. Just a question about transport. We've got 2 university campuses opening up shortly, not to mention all the cultural institutions we're discussing. Have you made an assessment on what impact this will have on an already crowded station?
Yes. Those kinds of impact assessments are carried out at the point of the planning permission. So we're very conscious that Stratford Station pre-pandemic was under tremendous pressure. But these, every planning permission on the park, and more than ever now, is under a lot of scrutiny to do with the ability of the station to cope. So yes, we have haven't got the numbers in front of me, and I was asked last time, it went out in a letter to Assembly members, but we do have a good modal share in terms of people coming to the park by bicycle and by public transport. We have quite a lot of cyclists. I'm not quite clear how that's going to land with the student population. We'll need to see how that works, because a lot of these students won't necessarily be living locally, so they won't necessarily be walking to campus.
Yeah. And have you had any discussions with TfL, Network Rail, about the capacity of the station to serve the park and the local area?
Yeah. Essentially, there's a big piece of work going on with Stratford Station. So when we talk to our partners at Network Rail and TfL, if we just think about pre-COVID, this station will fall over in capacity terms in 2031 if we were to continue growing as we are now and doing nothing. So that's well known. There is lots of modelling that's taken place between the technical teams in that regard. And about 18 months ago, we entered into a strategic project with those partners and with the London Borough of Newham to look at the long-term redevelopment of Stratford Station. Pre-COVID, it's been under tremendous pressure. It's an area that continues to grow. We're a little bit unclear about how travel patterns are going to settle down, but for the moment, we are working towards trying to get a strategic outline business case to the government by the end of 2022 to put a funding bid in for a significant development project at Stratford, which we think we have to do.
Is that in terms of reconfiguring the station, essentially?
Yes.
Okay. And that's end of 2022, did you say?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Has the Mayor played any part in these discussions?
Yeah, TfL are round the table. Yeah, so the Mayor's aware and keen to support. I think we saw recently, I don't know if you saw in the statistics, that Stratford Station was the busiest station during the pandemic. And I think the conclusions are that we have such a mix of people coming to the area, whether for shopping. Is a huge shopping centre that, you know, deals with 60 million people a year, unbelievably. But there are lots of leisure uses in the area as well. So whether it's the stadium or other leisure uses here and there that brings that pressure. And that's before we start talking about local commuters and people coming to work. We also have in East London quite a high level of people who were working through the pandemic and not able to work from home in those kinds of frontline jobs.
Yeah, Stratford is almost unique in the different land uses it serves within its immediate area.
It's pretty mixed, actually. Yeah.
Moving on, what are the opportunities of East Bank for other park income?
Arising from East Bank. Well, we are hopeful. We've pulled together a commercial strategy for the park. It's in its infancy. And for the first time this year, we've put a target into the budget starting in 2023 to bring commercial income into the park. So there should be opportunities for sponsorship, advertising, and other income through food and beverage. We talked earlier about the retail units. No doubt they will be food and beverage units, at least some of them, to try and lever some of that in a better way. So at the moment, we run the park like any public park, you know. We don't make a great deal of trading income except for our long-standing tenants, and you can see those in our trading accounts. We think there are opportunities to go further without exploiting the integrity of the park. So we're working hard on that, but we haven't yet got a full commercial plan that we can share with you at the moment.
What sort of opportunities are you sort of exploring?
Well, there's certainly opportunities of expanding the activity in the area. I don't know how well you know the park. In the area next to University College London, there are going to be thousands of students in the park. We want to make sure that they spend money in the park and that there's a return to the public purse in that sense. We have a cafeteria there called the Podium Cafe, and that's where the attraction of the sculpture and the slide is as well. We think there's a lot more we could do there, potentially with some outdoor entertainment space. And there are also some other areas of the park just in front of the stadium that we think could be exploited to advantage. But it is going to take some serious design work to make sure that we don't upset the planting and the biodiversity and we get the best of both worlds, because it's quite a tricky area.
Thank you. Your draft budget states that East Bank will deliver 2,500 jobs, 1.5 billion visitors and 1.5 billion of income for the local economy. What's the basis for those figures?
They were Green Book exercises with the Treasury, actually, I think, back in the day for the financial business case.
The economic evaluation.
Yeah.
Okay, and do you think that still stands today? Are you still confident of those figures?
I think we think we'll exceed it. Actually.
Yeah, we revisited it.
Yeah.
We revisited it last year, the year before last.
Year before.
Actually, when there was an increase in East Bank costs, and we were confident, and government was confident also that the value add was comfortably exceeded by the cost.
Yeah, they asked us to look at it again when we asked them for COVID contributions. So we've kept an eye on that over the past couple of years. Of course, we've also, what's not in those numbers either is the storehouse, the V&A storehouse across at here east. So we think that will help in the round with visitors and so on.
Thank you. Now, you touched on this a little bit in your responses to Assemblymember Pigeon. Reference the pandemic, but have you had any discussions with partners on any further impact you think the pandemic might have on income? I know we're all in very uncertain times at the moment.
With the East Bank partners? We work extremely closely with them, actually. Each of them has a designated project manager that represents each of the organisations. We're very open book and transparent on the costs. Where there can be efficiencies in the programme, they sit down with us and work out the designs around those. So we're very close with them, actually. So they are over virtually all of the numbers. We don't keep numbers in a cupboard. We're very open about it because we need these partners to really buy into any value engineering opportunities that might benefit us and so on. So that's all done hand in glove, really.
I mean, I think you've said before that all the partners are firm in their commitment despite the pandemic. That hasn't wavered at all. They're still all completely on board.
Absolutely. Yeah, and they do fantastic stuff in the local community. They really put themselves out and run extracurricular events at schools and summer schools and so on. So they're doing tremendously well. Still very committed. I mean, some of these partners, London College of Fashion and University College London, have joined Here East in a new programme of inward investment, which we call the Inclusive Innovation District. We're launching it in June. So because we have the advantages of having control in a private park, we can trial all sorts of things. So sustainable methods of transport, driverless vehicles, drones, and so on and so forth. And we're really starting to work with the academics around impact. Of course, academic institutions, it's really important for them that they can demonstrate impact locally and through local communities in order to keep their research grants where they need to be. So it's a win-win situation. So they really are joined up very closely, actually, with what's going on. It's good, and I think it will pay dividends over the next decade tremendously so.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. We're now moving on to the London Stadium and other operation costs. Oh, sorry, Assembly Member Pigeon, before we do that.
Could I just ask, what is the amount of money that you're putting into working with Network Rail and others around Stratford Station and the outline business case? And are you looking at also some interim kind of short-term measures to ensure safety at Stratford?
Yeah, there are two bits to your question there. So we have to do a long-term plan for a long-term significant development project. And for that, we've employed architects to look at movement strategies and so on. Fifth Studio are doing some work for us. And we are basically building a master plan, not only for the station, but the surrounding area, because obviously we're interested in landing the placemaking advantages. For example, linking up Stratford Station with the international station and the routes through and so on. So looking at all of that, we have a budget of £1 million that we're paying for 50-50 with Network Rail. So that piece of work will also include an economic study that will lead up to the submission to the government for the big project, if I can call it that. In the interim, Network Rail have already had a commitment from government to do some small-scale improvements. And I think that strategic outline business case for the small-scale improvements has been accepted by government. That includes a new station entrance on Monfitchet Road, a new station entrance near the Carpenters Estate, near the Jubilee line, and one or two other things, removal of barriers to the movement of people, so there are lifts in odd places and so on and so forth. So there's a small amount of money that's coming forward to do those interim improvements, and we'd expect those to start probably from next year, I would have thought.
Okay, lovely, thank you. I think we're going to pick up pace, colleagues, a little bit now. We're on to the London Stadium, so I'll hand over to Assembly Member Garrett.
Afternoon, hello. I understand you have £1.5 million increase in the stadium expenditure that you're putting in for 22-23. I was just wondering what work the new Chief Commercial Officer had undertaken to reduce the cost of the stadium and the overall park operational costs. So that's probably to you, Lynn, I guess, or maybe...
Yeah, shall I start?
Yeah.
Yes, the Chief Commercial Officer works across the stadium and the park. He started with us in September 2020 and brought forward an outline strategy, and he's been working on that. He started working with partners and collecting data and so on. So, but the really challenging thing here has been trying to pick up extra commercial income in the COVID period. So I'll give you a good example. We put in a new seating system into the stadium, which was a stadium initiative, not Chief Commercial Officer initiative. But in building it, we managed to build a whole new deck that can take 1,000 people for an event. And that is going to be a lovely space that we can put out for hire and so on and so forth. We've used it ourselves. But actually, it's really tricky trying to get that marketed right at the moment in this, particularly now, but even even this summer and this autumn, where we still had a lot of nervousness. What he is starting to see is a real pickup in the conversations with potential commercial partners. So for next year, we've put in some better commercial figures around the stadium in terms of partnerships. They're starting to pick up and get back on track. And we are in the market around stadium naming rights, but it's early days because we've suffered quite badly on the back of the pandemic, I'm afraid.
Okay, I think we'll come on to naming rights in a moment. I'm just wondering, maybe you just touched on it. So what progress has been made on developing that commercial strategy?
We've got some plans for the plans I was talking about earlier around the podium cafe and the slide and outdoor space. We've got some plans there, although if we were to procure, we need to procure a partner for that, so that will take some time to get into place, but we can see the art of the possible. That's part of his role that he's brought forward there. He also has some plans for what we call South Park, but again, it needs designing, so it will take a while to put into place. What else?
Sponsorship and marketing.
We've started the advertising strategy and the wayfinding piece. So we've started some work, but we've not money on the table. We haven't seen very much money on the table so far, to be clear about that.
And you're putting that down to sort of market nerves, are you?
Well, I am, because I think he's made some really good progress on the plans and so on, and they make sense. And I guess he was starting from a low base point. So quite often, you know, to encourage a sponsorship partner to come to the table, you have to be able to talk to them about who's coming to the park, who's going to be exposed to their product. Is he going to be able to communicate with those customers through, say, a data strategy? We didn't have any of that data strategy in place. So he's had to start from quite a low point in building up the whole of the strategic platform to have a good commercial conversation with partners. So I think that has taken some time. And we've trying to weave into that something somebody said earlier around the East Bank partners and how we build value together. What we do think coming out of the pandemic is that we think the park is a very attractive proposition. It seems that there's a lot of confidence out there. But as for people putting money on the table so far, we've not seen that yet.
Okay. In your draft budget shows your expected income of just under 17 million in 22-23, increasing to 20.6 by 24/5. Is that, do you think, a sort of upper limit of the park's likely income? The 26 figure? Sorry, the 20.6 figure.
So that I don't think it is. I don't think it is. We mentioned previously that we are expecting the fixed estate charge to grow over time. So that will increment that. We're looking currently at the strategy for reprocuring the venue operations and also the hard and soft facilities management services, things like security and maintenance. Now that might not impact the income, but it may do depending on how that cuts. We're also looking at a strategy for 3 mills, which is one of our success. It's been phenomenally successful actually, and at the moment. It has been a real boon through COVID. We've seen a growth in revenue there as compared to a lot of the other venues. So some of those things, do I think it's the peak? I don't think so, particularly the fixed estate charge. But also we'll see things like the retail strategy come in. We've already assumed some commercial revenue. We talked about stadium naming rights, and I think Lynn's mentioned obviously the environment through COVID was not conducive. You know, nobody was buying or selling naming rights. But now we can see some pickup in that market. But how the money goes into income or into or reducing cost, I don't know yet because we're still working that out.
Okay. On the spend to save seating plan idea, Do you know what kind of savings that might generate, sort of from 22 onwards?
Yeah, so we implemented the north south stand new stands, and we're just at the point of agreeing a west stand improvement programme, and we think out of that's a substantial investment in capital. But we think that in any normal, in sort of concert type athletics year for the stadium, that will reduce seat move costs from 4.3 to 2 million. If MLB comes back to the stadium, that would be even more. So in terms of the stadium, we've got a, if you like, I don't know, it's difficult to improve the fundamentals, but in terms of reduction in the trading deficit, improvement in seat move costs, improvement in match day costs, even if they haven't gone down as quickly as we would have liked. The trend is all there, but the stadium has a fundamental, fundamentally, if the contractual arrangements don't change, then there is an inherent deficit in that.
Okay, I might come back to that in a moment, actually. But in the budget, there's a new commercial line, and the revenue budget anticipates £2.3 million in 23-24. What are the sort of, obviously that's a specific figure, but what are the sort of risks that you would think around that figure?
So we debated this sort of fairly long and hard with the GLA, well, internally and with the GLA, and Lynn's talked about all of the range of things that would feed into that figure, and like I say, as Lynn said, we're developing that strategy. So we wanted to include the target because we want to be ambitious, but it is not without risk, and there is some contingency provision against not achieving that target. But the balance of whether to put it in or not put it in, we wanted to include the target in our numbers. So that's what we've done. But we all appreciate that there's some leap of faith around that and some aspiration around it as well.
So in terms of the sort of commercial opportunities, other than the items that are in the budget, is there anything else that's sort of on the table being talked about or discussed as future possibilities?
They're largely sort of sponsorship opportunities. So, for example, partnering with second-tier sponsors on, say, I don't know, Walker's Crisps or Coca-Cola, or this is how the pattern works potentially across the venues. We've got a couple of those in the pipeline for the stadium coming forward. So, we might have something like a specialist coffee provider, and that will bring a sponsorship opportunity with it, for example. We have also talked to people about naming rights opportunities associated with the buildings. We have to be a bit careful about that because we're Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park, and so we cannot interfere with branding in that sense. And that's where I was saying earlier, there's quite a lot of interesting conversations going on about that, because I think that more and more big companies want to be associated in sort of CSR terms, if you like, with the kinds of things that we're able to offer in terms of socio-economic change, also in terms of sustainability. Park's an incredibly sustainable place, and that drives a lot of interest from some companies.
So in your budget refers to the additional commercial opportunities currently in negotiation and not reflected in the budget submission. Is that the kinds of things you've just mentioned?
Those ones that are written there are to do specifically with the stadium, I think.
They are.
Yeah,
The potential for additional events.
Yeah, and they're a little bit more advanced than the park-wide stuff.
In terms of the stadium, I don't know, there's sort of been a lot of talk about the relationship with West Ham. Has there been a sort of sit-down discussion with West Ham, sort of exploring possibilities and how that you can work together with them and how best that could be?
On commercial opportunities?
Well, on commercial opportunities, on the operational running of match days. It feels like there's an awful lot of things that you and they are both doing, and how well are you working together to
the teams do work together on the ground. So the football club has an operational core They have a number of people on a match day who help them with their operational core activities, and then obviously we run the operation for them. Those teams are in constant conversation, so they talk every time there's a match day. You know, they're in the planning teams, they're all in the safety meetings together, so that's a good tight relationship. On the commercial side, the club has their own commercial officer who, interestingly, his name's Nathan, which is the same as the guy's name who works for me, which is kind of amazing, really. So, yeah, they know each other really well, and we'll talk on opportunities where we can work together to exploit something. The way the concession agreement works is it carves out some of the rights for E20 and some of the rights for West Ham. Sometimes there are deals to be done on sharing some of those rights, obviously. And with the stadium naming rights, the club does have to be involved in that. So the concession agreement is clear that there has to be a joint approach to a stadium naming rights partner. And that makes perfect sense, because if we work together on it, we're more likely to get better value from it.
So in terms of the match day operations then, because obviously that's effectively a cost that's sort of
Yes.
sitting as a taxpayer cost.
Yeah.
I don't know, I mean, it's not my area, but I sense that football clubs have got a lot of experience of running match day operations.
Yeah.
I don't know what, I mean, is it possible for West Ham to take on more than they're doing? Would they, you know, maybe they would be able to run it, you know, more efficiently, more commercially than we're able to?
It would be possible. It would be possible. And we remain open to conversations about more match day control and so on, because obviously we have two things on our minds: the cost to the public purse and health and safety. We must run the venue as a safe venue, and that's obviously really important. You know, this is an 80,000 seater stadium. It's a big risk in terms of health and safety, and that's how we run our operation in that way.
Okay. So in terms of, I appreciate what you were saying about the sort of operational discussions around, you know, specific match days.
Yeah.
Are there these sort of broad, you know, exploratory type conversations going on between yourselves and West Ham to sort of, you know, explore not just how the existing thing can be done better, but, you know,
Not right now. Not right now. No.
Is there a reason?
Interestingly, I think we've got a conversation going on right now about the pressures around fan behaviour in the stadium, because it's pushing up match day costs a bit right now. And interestingly, I had a letter from the club just yesterday suggesting that the operational teams go a little bit further in terms of their conversations to control that. So we already work really well with the club on excluding people who exhibit bad behaviour and so on, those kinds of things, banning orders, working with the police, that's all in place. But we did have a letter yesterday with a suggestion that we might sit down with some new ideas. So yes, we'll take that.
So there's not a particular reason why it hasn't happened. It's just, I mean, again, you've given examples of really detailed operational stuff, which is important, but that sort of high-level stuff hasn't happened. But
it's not happening at the moment, no.
So next time we're talking to you, will you be able to update us on something that has happened in that sort of broader?
We may be able to. We may be able to. Yeah, we're open-minded in that space.
I mean, it's sort of, sorry to be rude, it sort of sounds like a, you know, if they call us, you know, don't call us, we'll call you kind of thing you're saying. Am I misinterpreting
Let me go a bit further. We've offered a conversation to the club around more control of the stadium, but we haven't actually had the conversation yet.
Okay. Well, I guess we can look forward to that happening. Did you want me to do the naming right question, shall I?
I promised to bring in Assembly Member Clark.
Okay.
I must just say, though, and I will come in on this naming rights thing, I've heard all of that before. And it's like a broken record at the moment, but I'll come back to that. Assembly Member Clark.
That seems to be working now, thank you. The Orbit is set to make a profit in 2023-24. How confident are you now that that will happen?
Sorry, did you say the Orbit?
Yes.
Yes. The Orbit has struggled through COVID, and we have reduced the opening times. But Lynn's detailed the sort of the opening trajectory of the East Bank, and that really is what underpins our confidence that the Orbit will return. we think that particularly with the mix of students and with additional visitors, that we should be able to improve the profitability of the orbit.
Okay, thank you. And just in general, how confident can you be in your assumptions for income generation at park venues and assets such as cafes? I mean, I heard you talking about coffee shops earlier, and that's fantastic. But given the current uncertainty caused by COVID, how confident are you in your assumptions?
I think we're reasonably confident in a return to visitors, and actually with the return to visitors as economic activity, the park has been phenomenally well used in the COVID period. I think if you go and have a look at what's emerging on East Bank now, it might just be us being geeky, but it's really, really exciting to look at a new area of London emerging out of a building site. It's I think in terms of visitor numbers, we're reasonably confident. We think that will translate.
We are. So we've got the current visitor numbers, haven't we? We've got these students coming, don't forget, and then we're building residential homes. So I think that we're fairly bullish, actually, that what we've got here is reasonably prudent and that we will be able to achieve it. We think we've put quite a prudent budget together this time.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. I think Assembly Member Garrett wants to just come back on the naming rights, and then I'll come in underneath, and then Assembly Member Pidgeon wants to come in after that.
Yes, so just on the naming rights, if you could just sort of, what is the current position? And just to throw in a bone, how has it taken so long to get to the position that we're now at? Because I know this is something that's been going on for a bit.
Yeah. My historical answers to the chair, and she'll recall, have been there have been relationship difficulties with the club in the past. I like to think that we're beyond most of those now. And when I say relationship difficulties, in order to sign a joint naming rights partner contract, it's quite difficult to do that with a partner when you're in legals with them, which we were in 2018. Frankly, it's not happening. The relationship was simply not good enough to be able to have a meaningful conversation. By the time we got through that and into the next year, we started to work quite hard, actually, with naming rights opportunities. I don't mind telling you that we had a good lead lined up from potentially a very meaningful partner. It fell away in March 2020, and obviously hasn't been seen since in terms of anything happening there. So that partner's not been back, and we've lost it. Since then, we've had one more conversation that has also fallen away, which we had at the back end of 2020, which was quite surprising, but nothing else. We've just started working with some partners again more recently, and it's feeling more optimistic. But we will need to be in a good place with the club to be able to make that happen. So I'm feeling probably more optimistic than I ever have done in this job. I started in February 2018 of being able to move that on during 2022. But what we've done for the budget is we've remained cautious because we are in a post-COVID world and we wanted to be prudent in this budget. But we feel reasonably hopeful at the moment.
Okay, and it sounds like the relationship with West Ham is sort of important for that, and
it is important. Yes, it is important.
You're working with them because maybe something maybe their commercial contacts could help with that as well.
Absolutely, yeah, and frankly, they're more experienced in this world than we are, so we can learn a lot.
Okay, just two quick further questions. So, how much have we spent so far on the sort of search for a naming partner? It feels like it's been quite a thorough.
I think this is a matter of record, actually. Some years ago,
I would have to go and we haven't spent anything other than internal resource in the recent campaign, but I would have to dig out Sorry, I don't.
There are some historical spends because we previously, the organisation previously ran 2 separate campaigns to secure a naming rights partner and wasn't successful. So we can share those agency fees. Yeah.
Okay. And then finally, obviously, we spoke a bit about, how the football club might be able to provide some oomph or some contacts. I don't know whether the oomph from the mayor's office, has that been helping, supporting, with contacts or sort of prestige of the mayor's office, supporting that search?
Yeah, actually, we have a good relationship with that part of the mayor's office because we work with them quite closely on major sporting events. So, yeah, we know them quite well. The individuals have changed recently in terms of the mayor's top team, but we worked really closely with Leah Kreitman, for example, on sporting opportunities across London and across the major stadium.
But in terms of the mayor himself, sort of sticking his brand on it and his name and really giving it some oomph to sort of say this is a prestige opportunity, come and
we don't do that at the moment, and probably what we would do is firm up our leads before going into that sort of territory, to be honest, so that we could have some proper conversations, I suppose, at meaningful levels in organisations. Okay. Yeah.
That makes sense. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, I mean, you know how vexed I am about this,
Yes.
because this has been going on for years and years, and we're always told that you're optimistic and you're more optimistic and then even more optimistic, which doesn't, I'm not optimistic because we keep hearing the same things. And of course, it's not just the cost of trying to get a sponsor, it's the opportunity lost.
Yes.
Because, and that can amount to, well, tens or hundreds of thousands, and that
Yes.
needs to be put into the equation.
Yeah.
This is obviously the relationship with West Ham is absolutely vital, and I'm going to ask you to put some things in writing. We'll write to you and ask you to confirm some of these things. I would like to know what the Chief Commercial Officer, who was sold to us as the answer to everything, has actually managed to bring home, as it were, in funding costs or in funding advantages, because we were told that last December, actually, then I think you said, I am optimistic that we will see something start emerging at the back end of 2021 at the latest, et cetera, et cetera. I'm really round off with hearing about all this. And as for these naming things, we'll put in writing to you a question about that, because I'm mindful of the time, colleagues. Assembly Member Pidgeon wanted to come in at the end of this.
I did want to come in. In August, it was reported that LLDC had entered into discussions with PAI Capital
Yes.
on a set of principles that if it was adopted, they would own the stadium on a long lease. And then I was looking into this further, and in October, it was reported they pulled out of a deal to buy West Ham United. So obviously that was a sort of link to it. Because as soon as I saw that and heard that, I thought that was really exciting. That
Yes.
there could be, obviously I don't really understand the football world, but the owner of this club, they would have the long lease. That takes a huge liability off the public. And so I'm wondering if you can confirm the current situation there, but is that a possible way forward? That actually you could, whoever might own the club could also look to have a long-term lease. Would that also get rid of all these sort of E20 type things, or is that another? I just saw this as, wow, this is a way to get this burden off the taxpayer and still maintain the stadium. So could you just give us a bit more on that, please?
Yeah, no problem. This organisation, a consortium of individuals, actually approached us last summer, and they told us that they were in advanced discussions with the club on purchasing, taking a controlling interest in the club. They asked us on that basis, would we be prepared to enter into a long leasehold position with them so that they would take control of the multi-use stadium, including football, but other events and concerts as well. And we said that in principle, we would be prepared to have that conversation. And of course, the detail, you talked there about the burden on the public purse, the detail would have to be worked out over time. But in this kind of situation that we find ourselves in, where the loss to the public purse is operationally £17 million a year, and then we have the capital life cycle to cater for as well, We can't afford not to consider anything that's put to us, and so yes, we entered into those conversations, but my understanding is that the deal with the club did not come off.
Is this not potential way forward? I'm just thinking, somebody linking the naming rights, the club, the long lease. I just think that this could be a possible angle. And is your commercial director working on that and talking to West Ham about this? Because that could be, I don't understand how all this works, but if one group was trying to buy the club, then potentially there might be another investor coming along.
Yes, so that's a live potential way forward. Yeah.
That is something, so you might be able to, when you're before us next year, so we can quote this when we come to you, that might be an area that's moved forward.
Yeah, it would need the club to be fully engaged and in that conversation and want to take on those additional responsibilities. So we'd need to make sure that they want to engage at that level. But absolutely, yeah.
And they would have to take on things like the athletics obligations and all that as well.
At the moment, in terms of if London wants to retain a multi-use stadium, then yes.
Okay, and I did have another question. I couldn't work out where it just fitted around. This section is also on other income. In terms of ABBA Voyage, it's due to open this new 3,000 capacity venue.
Yeah.
Whereabouts in the park is that, and what income is that going to generate?
It's I haven't got the income number actually. Have you?
I do have the income number, but I don't think we've
we're not allowed to say
right, okay. into the public. But it is one of our on-park property income lines.
Yes, it's going to be right opposite Pudding Mill Lane Station. Well, it is there. It's been built. They're just completing the venue at the moment. It's opening in May.
Yes, it's opening in it's opening in May, but. It must be in your budget. So
yes, it's bringing in an income stream.
Yes, we have interim use income, and we're from a financial perspective, it's reflected in the budget.
So, what is that figure in that line in your budget, please?
What I was just saying to Lynn was, I don't think we've released that figure publicly.
Is it commercially confidential?
If it's a line in your budget, then you can tell me what's in that line.
It is in the budget. If we're not precluded from releasing it, I'm happy to when we write to send it to you. But I just
we don't have it in front of us in our notes today. Definitely.
Okay, we'll definitely put that in.
That could be potentially, really profitable for.
It is bringing in an income.
It is bringing in income. Yeah.
Thank you.
We'll put that in writing. Yeah. The last question I will put in writing, but to give you notice, it will be what factors have contributed to the negative 268 million net asset position in the 21-22 financial statements. We'll put that and my question to you in writing, because we want to pick up pace if we can. And if you could bear that in mind in answering the last section, which is the transition and Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park strategy to 2025. And Assembly Member Russell is going to ask the first couple of questions.
Thank you, Chair. So we touched very briefly on transition in relation to planning earlier, but Lynn, what key steps need to be taken to transition the governance of the park?
Yeah, so this is it's a live issue, obviously, and it's a project that I was asked to lead on as soon as I was appointed. So we knew the direction of travel. There will be some kind of successor body in place, because there will be a number of functions that will need to continue in what is essentially a great estate type model. But we will be reducing the geography. So we won't have all of that planning hinterland. We'll be reducing the geography probably to largely the park. So we'll be considering governance in the light of the park. We've looked at a number of models, and we want to keep local borough influence at the table. So in talking to our board at the moment, wanting to shrink the geographical area, wanting to keep good local influence, wanting to have the right skills on any board for the functionality that will be left behind. Don't forget, we will still own and manage the park and the venues. There will be some, we hope, some decent commercial activity in there, reference previous conversation. And we will also have a strategic responsibility in partnership with the boroughs for something called inclusive economy, which will largely be driven around our innovation district with Here East and other academic partners that I spoke about earlier. So we know what we know what we want to do. There are a whole series of work streams around this, including workforce planning, how we can get the budget sustainable in the long term, that we're looking at, how we keep people in their jobs to complete the development projects before we transition, key piece of work there. We're very close to the boroughs, so we have a number of interfaces into the boroughs. There's something called a borough transition group that meets on a monthly basis with my officers and works through the detail of the work streams. It's a very transparent and open process with the boroughs. We are targeting some key decisions coming through our board in March, and that will be consolidating the new governance, consolidating the geographical influence of this body, being clear on its functions, and then we want to come forward to the mayor for his approval once it's been through our board. So gives you a sense of the activities at the moment.
And in terms of timescales, how much of this is happening in the 2022-23 year? I mean, you mentioned March, having key decisions going through your board in March and then going to the mayor for approval. Are you expecting all of that to happen in this 22-23
I'm expecting
year?
the approvals to happen for the governance structure of what's intended, and the attitude that we've taken is that it's really important to agree with our board and the mayor what the functions are and what this governance looks like, because once we are all clear on that, we can really start working with our teams on concentrating on the job in hand over the next 3 years and finishing the projects, but also working out the workforce implications, because we'll need to work backwards from D-Day, so to speak, in terms of how we manage our workforce and where they're going to be placed. Some of them will clearly transfer into the successor body, so anybody looking after the park and venues, for example, is likely to transfer. Planning functions are going back to the borough, and there may be some 2P issues to deal with there. And then we have the development functions to make sure that we complete the job of work that we've been talking about today, which is getting essentially those residential contracts placed and through the planning process over the next 3 years.
So are you confident that you can get the transition to happen by 2025?
Yes.
And I think that's all my questions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Are you confident you're going to be able to attract the right calibre of candidates to take it over?
In terms of the board governance, I think that, and actually, it's a good question in terms of staff as well, because we'll need to make it interesting enough to retain people. One of the most challenging areas is going to be in development, because as the development functions wind down, then we're anxious about losing good people. But nevertheless, we will want some sort of clienting development function in place, so that we touched on this a little bit earlier with Dr. Sahota. The thing is that if we're not over the clienting of the contracts we have, then we may not get the products that we contracted to get. And so about keeping developers in the right space, and we'll have a number of joint venture activities, so there'll be some governance of the joint venture activities in development terms as well. That's where I suppose I'm most worried about losing talent. So we do need to make it attractive, and we do need to work in partnership and collaborate with the GLA around their development functions, because there's a lot of talent in the wider GLA family as well that we can, if we work together on this, we can help people move on and move through their careers, but keep some good talent focused where we need it as well.
Okay, thanks. And have you given any consideration to who will be running and maintaining assets such as the stadium?
That's a bit of work in progress. We've spoken a bit about that today. At the moment, the operating company reports into me. I think that's a huge responsibility for the successor body, and we do need to explore other models, which we'll be doing as we go forward.
Okay, I mean, West Ham have got new investors. Have you spoken to them, or is it to them you've put out the,
We haven't spoken to them as yet, no.
You will be though, I assume.
It would be useful to, yes.
Certainly would, yes. Have you established, Jerry really, I suppose, have you established any baseline costs for the transition process?
We have included some very high-level costs. So we have more certainty around things like data transfer and legal costs in the short term, but we have very, very high-level estimates for essentially people costs. We need to work out the work, what the organisation looks like. So as Lynn said, it's a progression, understanding what the terms of reference of the scope of the organisation, its governance, etc., and then to build underneath the functions that support that and support the activity of the new body, and that's when we will be able to have a much better idea of what the costs might be.
Because that's vital that we know that, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
how, this is the last question, but I'm going to be sending you some more though, if that's all right. How will the long-term public subsidy be minimised given the relatively low levels of income you're currently generating? Clearly the public should not be constantly bailing this out.
I think until we've done this exercise that we need to do, so at the moment we are right in the middle of building an exercise whereby we work out how much is it going to cost us in workforce terms and what workforce do we need up to transition. We've also asked our senior managers to think about what does this organisation look like post-transition. So that process will involve a challenge that Jerry and I will be involved in across the organisation to make sure that we bring that post-transition number down as far as possible. Now, when we get to that number, we will be very alive to the gap for the sustainability piece.
And when are you hoping to get that sorted, that number?
This spring. Yeah.
This spring?
Yeah, so it's vital that
March.
we have those numbers ready for next time's
budget. Well, it is, but that's a year away.
Yes, but
Obviously,
we're working on
be-
it now, and we should have some answers in the spring. Yeah.
So if we were to ask you by the end of March, by Easter, you'll know?
We should have a clearer picture.
I'm always so
on the
concerned
workforce
everything takes so
implications,
long.
yeah.
And clearly these figures are vital. I will put more in writing to you. I'm mindful of the time, so we'll finish. What we will do, I'm sure... Oh, Len, if it's quick, Len, because we're really running over. We can't hear you.
Chair, we might be running over, but it's quite fundamentally important.
Go
as
on
we
then. Go on then.
In the first year, in the next year rather. So, really, a question to Lynn. I don't know of an international stadium, football stadium, or an international park that actually makes money. In your exercise, have you got anywhere in this world that you can point to, in the world, I think, and widen it out a little bit, of where you think there is that stadium, that including a football club, that makes the level of money, right, that breaks even or makes a profit, or an international park with other stadium facilities that makes money? Because I just become slightly concerned about some of the language and about that. Isn't the aim of what we need to be doing is trying to minimise the public subsidy into the area, rather than actually trying to think there's some holy grail that says there won't ever be a public subsidy in these facilities?
Lynn?
Yeah, there are two elements to this. When we talk about sustainability, we are talking about the operation of the park itself, and we're carving out the stadium because, look, we've got a historical set of circumstances that we've been dealt on the stadium that needs separate treatment in terms of a sustainable financial position that we may never get to because we have a contract that we have for 90 years. So the sustainability piece that we're talking about here with you is long-term. It's about how we sort out what we need post-transition and have that signed off by the mayor. It's about what the gap is after the fixed estate charge in the longer term and what we can bring in commercial income, and having a conversation about that next year. We need to have that conversation next year. With regard to the stadium, I don't know of any other example like the one we've got in London, actually. I can't think of a single multi-use stadium in the world that has a football club and makes money, but then I'm not an expert in that field, but nothing springs to mind. Certainly, there are very, very few Olympic stadia that are in use with something like a Premier League football club in them and working effectively. There's only one other arrangement like ours in the whole of the UK where the ownership of this, as far as I know, where the ownership of the stadium is owned by a local authority, and that's Manchester City on the back of the Commonwealth Games, but they have a long lease, so it's a different kind of arrangement and they run the operation themselves. So the circumstances are quite unique that we're trying to deal with. It's not as if there are a bunch of other people you can go and get advice from. You know, we work with the partners we've got, whether they be UKA or the football club, but we've got long-term concessions here and we are contractually bound for 90 years on what we're dealing with. So I think you're right. Our aim is to absolutely reduce the public subsidy as far as you possibly can. But there are risks associated with this, and we've discussed some avenues for improvement. And, you know, we have to be open-minded and willing to look at everything we can, really. You know, on balance, the stadium is a very successful venue. If we look around the world, it makes a lot of money for the London economy. When we have things like Major League Baseball, World Athletics, concerts and so on, people spend money in the London stores and the food and beverage outlets. So there's a lot of good to it. If we can reduce the public subsidy substantially through other arrangements, let's look at it, definitely.
Lovely. Okay, thanks very much. Thanks, Len. Right, okay. I think the committee would like to go and have a visit there if we can organise that, because things have changed.
We'd love that.
And we'd like to visualise, I certainly would. I went such a long time ago. I need to know what's up and what isn't, and we can, I think we'll all benefit from that, so we'll do that. So I would like to thank our guests for attending this afternoon, and thank you for answering our questions. There'll be a slight moment while our next guests take their positions. Thank you, ladies, very much for answering. We'll send you the details of the things that we want back. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Right, okay, everybody ready? Let's start this section. So I would like to welcome our second panel of guests from the OPDC. That's David Luntz, the Chief Executive Officer, and Jaspir Shandu, Chief Finance Officer. Hello. So I'm going to start the questioning. It's titled New Approach. So, David, what was the biggest challenge you faced putting together the 22-23 budget?
Well, thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for having us along this afternoon. I think the biggest single challenge, and we've spoken about this in recent meetings with Assembly members, is probably the fact that there's still so much uncertainty ahead in terms of the negotiations, the discussions that we've been having with government to try and reach an agreement about the treatment of the land that the various government agencies own in and around the new high-speed 2 station, and a package of support funding to go alongside a different way to organise those land assets in order to really get our major strategic regeneration plans underway and moving into delivery. So the budget that we've set within the envelope that we were given by the Mayor is a budget that we feel confident will allow us to continue to develop those plans and indeed to begin to implement them, assuming that we're successful in those discussions with central government. But I think if we are going to ultimately deliver the project that we are there to do, then we're going to need additional resource at some point in the future. So I think it's that uncertainty, particularly around perhaps the timing of any deal with government, that makes things quite difficult in terms of forward planning.
Okay, the draft budget, paragraph 4, mentions increased funding to, and I quote, to support a significant increase in interventions in Park Royal. What are those interventions and how did you go about calculating the resource needed for their implementation?
So we are going through a process of revising our Park Royal plans or our Park Royal strategy. We've taken the view that what we really need is a wider and slightly more granular approach to what one might call economic development and business support. So rather than having a specific Park Royal programme, in future we will be looking to have a wider economic development programme. One of the major changes in that, as well as looking at a wider area, because certainly with the new plans we have and the modifications to our draft local plan, then the proposals to, if you like, shift a lot of the industrial and employment space from Old Oak North and replace that with residential is no longer the case, which means that clearly in terms of an economic development plan, a business support plan, we need to look more widely than just Park Royal. One of the things that that revised strategy is going to do is to look at the very specific requirements of different parts of the economic development landscape in our area, because we've got very different areas. We've got, large-scale logistics and distribution depots. We've got an increasing number of new data centres, about 5 either there or underway. But we've also got, some very small-scale businesses, some creative businesses, as well as major operators such as, Car Giant in Old Oak North. So one of the things we're going to be doing is looking in a lot more detail at how we can do our best to support those different, if you like, different tiers of economic operation. Because what we don't want to do in bringing new jobs and industry into the area is simply sweep away, particularly a lot of the smaller businesses that are really fundamental to that economic ecosystem.
I would have thought that was, forgive me, obvious. Did you not think of that before?
Well, I've been the chief executive for almost exactly a year now. And one of the things I've been keen to do, along with the board, is to have a fresh look at this in the context of our revised approach to what we call the Western Lands and the modifications to the local plan. So we've gone through a fairly major change, a major shift in terms of our strategic priorities. And I think that's one of the reasons why we're looking again at our priorities around economic development. I think that makes perfect sense.
Let's face it, David, it was an absolute disaster last time, the whole situation with Car Giant. Then you were going to shift the whole thing to a different area, which we all understand. Are you saying you're changing from the shifting, you're changing priorities, or is it the same and you're just telling me the same as you did last time?
I think the core priorities that we've been working on for a long time remain in place in terms of things like more sustainable travel to work for Park Royal, in terms of doing more to support some of the infrastructure that business requires, whether it's digital technology, certainly a huge priority around trying to create a more sustainable energy infrastructure and start to decarbonise the economic development landscape in our area. But also, of course, this really important point about not modernising and improving and growing the offer, the economic development offer, for its own sake. What we want to see is that rich variety of smaller, medium-sized and larger businesses thriving together. And that's a fairly hefty challenge, actually. It's very easy sometimes for growth and regeneration to just sweep aside some of the smaller, more creative types that often rely on more affordable space, for instance.
I would have thought that would have been in place from the beginning and taken as a given. But anyway, has the Mayor expressed any concerns or hesitancy regarding any of this? I mean, if I was him, I would, but that doesn't mean he will. Has he expressed any concerns?
Sorry, relating to what anything in particular?
Regarding the OPDC's plans for 22-23. Does he believe that what you've set out is achievable?
Well, the Mayor's been extremely supportive of our plans. Liz Peace, the Chair, and myself saw the Mayor about 6 or 8 weeks ago to go through them, told him exactly where we were, explained, the opportunities, but also the challenges that we see ahead, and he was absolutely and completely supportive,
okay.
and has been, lobbying ministers more recently to hopefully come to a deal to really get things moving at Old Oak.
More money, yeah. Yeah, okay, thank you. Jasbir, the Mayor's proposed gross revenue expenditure for the OPDC in 22-23 is £1 million higher than forecast expenditure in 21-22. What will the additional funding deliver?
That's correct, Chair. So, excuse my voice. There is a difference of £1 million between the outturn and the budget, but in terms of comparing the budget that was allocated for this year compared to the next financial year, it's an increase of £400,000 year on year. And that additional money has actually been directed to increasing the interventions that David has mentioned within Park Roll to increase sustainability and support the industry.
Okay, what has the OPDC small grants programme delivered, which is different from what the Mayor could have achieved centrally or through his numerous existing grant or funding pots?
The small grants programme, the small grants programme has been part of what we call the Great Places scheme. And it's been a really successful, it's just concluded actually, it concluded in September, which coincided with the London Design Festival, which came to Park Royal for the first time. I think it was a really successful community-based programme. It was funded through a combination of Mayor's money and external money, particularly from the Heritage Lottery Fund. So one of the things it enabled us to do was to get more leverage and get more investment into local community groups and projects. And it's created a whole plethora of really small scale, but genuinely community-led initiatives, all sorts of things from modest improvements to public realm to drop-in centres and childcare support and all sorts of things locally. And I'd be very happy indeed to give members a note that can go through that in detail, because
that's really helpful, because I was just about to ask you for that, because it is £250,000. So you'll send us a complete detail of where that money's gone, how much it is, and what the achievements were from it.
Certainly can. Yes.
Excellent. That is really good, and that's helpful and transparent, which we do like on this committee. Thank you. How much of an impact has the COVID-19 pandemic had on your spending for 21-22?
Well, if I could start, and Jasbir may want to add, I think it certainly led to some delays, and we've just talked about the Great Places scheme, and we, with the agreement of the Heritage Lottery Fund, grant makers agreed an extension to that programme, because as members will appreciate, it's been extremely difficult, particularly through the earlier stages of COVID and lockdown, to continue to engage with physical meetings and so forth. So there were certainly some delays. I think we've found, like many other projects that have, a construction component, that on-site contractors and developers are struggling with the well-known problems of not so much labour supply actually, but building materials and supply chain constraints. I think that's an ongoing issue. It's certainly put a considerable strain into the lives of residents who, in many cases, are already struggling. Our part of West London is a very disadvantaged and deprived area, and that's one of the reasons why OPDC made donations in the early stages of lockdown to support local food banks and emergency interventions. I think we've recovered pretty well, like every organisation as well. We've had to adapt to remote working. We're all familiar with that now. I don't think the efficiency of my team has been denuded particularly. And we are, or at least we have been until very recently, back in the office, our new office at Wembley, and people are working relatively normally, which has been good. So I think that would be my summary. I suppose the one thing I would add as well is that there is no doubt that the West London economy has taken a significant hit through COVID, and Park Royal's no exception to that. In fact, I think in relative terms, in terms of impact from where an economy was to where it was, where it became after COVID, West London's been hit as one of the most serious, or it's had some of the most serious impacts of any parts of the country. And certainly some businesses are still struggling to bounce back from that.
I believe they're all over the place, which is sad and inevitable. You mentioned donations. How much did you donate? What was the cost of donations?
We donated, I think we made three £60,000 donations via each of the boroughs. Mm-hmm. So to Brent, Hammersmith and Fulham, and to Ealing. And those were specifically allocated for frontline support for food banks and other emergency support. And we did that in, forgive me, I can't remember exactly when it was, but it was very shortly after the first lockdown began.
And this was out of the OPDC's money?
Yes.
Which was from taxpayers' money. And who decided the amount that should go, where it should go? How do we know exactly where it went? Who made that decision?
You mean in terms of making the approval for the initial spend?
180.
Yeah, well, that was done. I mean, that was done by me as CEO with the board's approval. And in terms of where that money went and how it was actually allocated, that was organised in agreement with the three boroughs. But the three boroughs were the conduit for that funding.
Do you think it's appropriate for a board or a position that you're in to donate money to something? Do you think it's appropriate?
I think in this instance it certainly was. I mean, as I say, we were a lot of residents and members of our local community were really facing, very considerable difficulties.
So if people lived in your area and you've got taxpayers' money sitting there, it's fine for them to get it, but other people that have also been suffering, lots of people have been suffering in other areas, don't. If you donate something because it's your money, it's absolutely for you to donate where you like. I'm surprised that a body like the OPDC decides to donate money just because they think they will. But perhaps we'll come back to that. I'm quite astonished by that.
If I may just come back very briefly on that point. I mean, two things to say really. One is it wasn't just money. We also donated a considerable amount of officer time. So we redeployed a lot of our staff and trained them to support some of the frontline activities, helplines and so forth, and help out local food banks. So it wasn't just about money. The other thing I'd add is that we have previously notified the Assembly and spoken about this. So this is not new news. We've mentioned it, I think, at least on one or two occasions in previous Assembly appearances.
Well, it doesn't stop me asking you questions about it. What would you say you'd achieved over this past year?
I think the achievements this year have been notable in the sense that, the big priority for me when I took over as permanent CEO last January was very much to try and get the new strategic approach to regeneration into a form where we could realistically anticipate not just engagement with government, but hopefully some agreement. So we've spent the year really doing two things to underpin that. One is to ensure that our local plan is proceeding at pace with the modifications we need to support that strategy after the planning inspector's report of a couple of years ago.
Yeah, we're coming on. We'll come on to that
and so that I'm pleased to say has proceeded, I think, very, very well. And the second is to compile a detailed and technically supported business case that we can present to government and ministers to articulate the case we're making for a coordinated and organised approach to the public land holdings, and as I said a few minutes ago, an enabling funding package to bring forward regeneration at the kind of scale that we know is necessary there. And I think on both counts, we've made very considerable progress during the course of the year. We've done a lot of other things as well, but I would point to those two as probably being perhaps the most significant.
Okay, and why is the revenue expenditure in 23-24 and 24-25 broadly in line with previous years when your local plan is set to be adopted next year? Are you not expecting costs to rise as you start to deliver?
Yes, indeed, Chair. And as I said at the outset, as we move into, hopefully move into a real delivery phase for this project, then I've no doubt at all that there is going to be a call on additional resources. That's a point that we've made, or I've made very directly to the Mayor and to GLA finance colleagues. And so, although it's not part of our budget submission, if there is a requirement during the course of the year because we find that we've made the progress we hope to, and we've got a need for additional resource to support the direct delivery component of our work, then, we would be expected, I think, to make a bid for additional funding were it to be necessary during the course of the year. And that would be made, I think, to the GLA's MDC Reserve Fund.
I take it you've already put that in place because you are very confident. I've never known you, David, when you haven't been very confident, whether you should be or not. But well, I'll leave that. Just tell me, please, as my last question, in total, how much funding has OPDC received from the GLA since 2016?
Do you want to answer that?
Yes, I can. So since inception, 1st of April 2015, the total expenditure for OPDC has been £39 million.
39 million?
Yes.
And exactly what have you got for that 39 million? Land?
No,
buildings?
not land, no,
Success?
Chair. Well,
anything that we can think, 39k of taxpayers' money. Million, beg your pardon, it's just such a large amount. £39 million, David Luntz. What has that achieved? Do we own any land? Do we own any buildings? What have we got for 39 million?
Well, we are a planning authority that spans 3 boroughs, and that's a considerable element in that overall cost.
39 million?
It's a substantial element of that overall cost, yes. And that's a statutory function, of course. That statutory planning function has overseen 6,000 residential planning consents or thereabouts during that time. We've seen almost 2,000 of those homes complete and another 2,000 or 3,000 shortly to complete. So I don't want to leave the Assembly members with the impression that this is all about strategies and plans and commitments for tomorrow. There's been a huge amount of activity in our area, and in fact, I think the Assembly is we're hoping to organise a visit for you in the early new year. But if you haven't been down there recently, I mean, it is an extraordinarily busy location with construction activity happening all over the place. Obviously, HS2 is a huge part of that, but so too are the construction cranes for new homes. So that's one thing that's been a success, I think, and a reason why that money needed to be invested. But alongside that, of course, is a huge amount of work to develop plans to bring about the kind of scale of change that you've been hearing about from
I accept that,
Lynn
but I
and Jerry
also
earlier.
accept the complete blunders, and I think it was 8 million that Liz accepted had been wasted by the things that happened around the car giant. I have been to the site, but that was to look at car giant. We're running short of time, so I'll move on. Just one very quick. Do you think £39 million is money well spent? Yes or no?
I've no reason to say it's not money well spent.
Okay.
I've not been at OPD since 2015, but I've no reason to think it wasn't.
We
a
will
sensible
agree to
investment.
differ, so it's good that we're in agreement to differ, if nothing else. Assembly Member Pigeon.
Can I just pick up, David, earlier, you said you've got a new office at Wembley.
Yes.
Tell me about that, because I thought OPDC was based here at Union Street. What's this new office? Are you sharing with someone? What's the cost of that? We're all having to cut back on office costs these days, hence we are here. So perhaps you could enlighten us.
Yeah, we certainly were based here, as you know, but with the GLA's relocation plans to move down to the Crystal and consolidate space here and at the Crystal building, there was no opportunity for us to take any space in either of those buildings. So we were required to identify somewhere else to locate. So we did a piece of work last spring, early summer, to think about what those locations should be. We looked, first of all, at whether there was any opportunity within the wider GLA estate. There wasn't. There was nothing available, particularly from TfL or anybody else. So the next port of call was to see if there was anywhere that we could occupy alongside any of our borough partners. And the reason we're in Wembley is that we've taken space in the corner of the Brent Civic Centre. So we're cohabiting, if you want to put it that way, with colleagues at Brent Borough Council. And we moved in September.
Okay, and is there a cost to that? What's the cost? Are you able to
there is a
provide
cost to that. I can't remember off the top of my head, Jasper.
So it's we're there on a licence agreement, and the cost of that is £100,000 a year.
So 100,000 a year for that. Okay, so that also ought to be factored into our overall issues of accommodation when we look at that, perhaps through oversight as well.
Well, absolutely, Assembly Member Pigeon, absolutely. And that's exactly what Assembly Member Garrett was going to ask about. We're going to move on now to local plan progress. Assembly Member Dr. Sahota.
Thank you, David. David, the chair questioned you about the use of taxpayers' money in the COVID pandemic of you giving some charitable causes. Can you just explain to me what this money was used for?
You mean the donations to
yes,
the three
the donations
boroughs?
you made.
Oh, they were primarily.
I think Mr.
Chair,
I have a right. He said he'd send us
follow up a questioning which you started off, and I have a right to follow that questioning.
Right. He was going to send us a list, but if you
want to, I want to follow it up, please, because I really want to make a point on that issue, Chair. Thank you.
So the funding was primarily aimed at supporting the resourcing of the local food banks, which were struggling at the time because obviously there was rising demand and they were desperately seeking donations and additional support. So most of the funding went to support food bank activity. And as I say, we also had volunteers from our staff that assisted with that as well.
I asked that question that you were helping to feed people who were reliant upon food banks.
Correct.
in a crisis situation which is unprecedented. Unlike taxpayers' money being used to line £20 billion to the tune of £20 billion for
Can you carry
test
on
and
with
tracing.
the questions, please?
Yeah, I know, Chair, this is very uncomfortable. I know, Chair, this is very uncomfortable.
No, it
but
isn't.
you,
I just want to get on with this
yes,
meeting.
Chair,
so if you
I
would.
know this is very uncomfortable, but I have a real issue with the use of taxpayers' money. I was concerned that the taxpayers' money were used for £20 billion for test and trace. But did anyone from your charitable causes, did anyone for charity you made, did they make money out of it from the taxpayer?
Oh, no, certainly not, no.
Because I do hear cases about where money was used for taxpayers' money for
Assembly Member Sahota, can we go back to the agenda, please?
Of course, Chair, this is very uncomfortable.
No, it's not. I just want us to get on with this
Yes, I want
meeting.
to. You made a point of establishing the value for money. You made the point, Chair, of establishing the use of taxpayers' money and for using money for good causes. And I'm really examining the use of taxpayers' money for good causes.
Right. Would you like to ask your questions now?
Well, I think I probably have made it uncomfortable for the chairman. And I will now proceed on to ask the questions which are on my list here. Do you see that the local plan that you have, a revised local plan, when do you think you will get permission for that? When it will be completed?
Yes, thank you very much for the question. I know I've previously said to the committee that I was hoping, with fingers crossed, that we may have got our local plan adopted potentially by the end of this year or the very beginning of next. The planning inspector has, following our public consultation on our local plan modifications, decided that he wants to have a limited number of, well, just 2 days hearings, actually, with a third in reserve, to listen to representations from, I think, 3 or possibly 4 locally interested parties. 3 parties, I think, but looking at 4 issues. The dates for those hearings has now been set for, I think it's the week commencing the 11th of January. So certainly by the middle of January, the formal process as far as public hearings and consultation and all the rest of it will be over. It will be then a matter for the planning inspector to write his report, and we will then consider what to do with it with a view to adoption. So I think the short answer is sometime next spring, I would anticipate now that we would be able to adopt the plan.
Is that a risk for could the planning inspector throw a spanner on the works?
I mean, we're very confident. I think the chair's going to berate me for being confident again now, but I think I'm pretty confident that that we've got a very, very strong case. Very different situation from the last time we were in front of the planning inspector, when we had principal landowners in a very hostile position, objecting to what we were looking to do, and some serious questions that then raised. This time round, we've got support from all local landowners and boroughs, and the representations that will be made will obviously be heard, but they're dealing with issues that I'm pretty confident we've got, extremely compelling case to come back with. So, yes, there's always a risk until you actually see the report, but I don't regard that risk as a major risk.
Okay, and once that local plan is approved, what will be the next steps afterwards?
Well, that then obviously becomes the statutory planning document that enables us to make the land use changes that we need to. So it'll do an awful lot of things, but one thing it will do is it will reallocate a lot of the residential development away from the land that we were looking to develop on and around the car giant site, and instead of that, deliver it on the public land sites, which are largely to the west of the new high-speed 2 station. So the really big principal change is effectively swapping the industrial land for the residential land. Without that in place, it makes it very difficult for us to really get on with the delivery of what we call our Western Land Strategy.
Thank you. At the plenary on the 11th of November, Les Peast told us that that homes that are either on site or to be completed will form about 42% of them will be affordable. What's the affordable percentage of completed homes, and what is the level of those under construction?
So I think in terms of completed homes, the current figure is, I think, 39% of those homes by habitable room are affordable. I think the percentage of consented homes, in other words, those that have had a planning consent but not necessarily been built, is slightly higher, 42%.
Yes.
I think it will probably end up somewhere, between 39 and 42 over the next few years. And we've obviously got a stretch target to try and deliver 50% affordable housing. And one of the advantages, I suppose, of moving to a strategy that's much more focused on publicly owned land is that gives us a better opportunity to get closer to that 50% target, because clearly the Mayor's policy, which will also be our policy, is that for public land, we should really be looking for 50% affordable rather than 35% as the planning threshold.
I understand that you intend to deliver 13,700 homes in the next 10 years on this site. How many of these will be affordable?
How many will be affordable? Well, as I say...
What proportion, I mean?
Well, I can't be precise, because clearly that we will need to be guided by schemes as they come forward, and there will be viability issues and all those things that have to get hammered out as one goes through the planning process. But as I say, our strategic target is for 50%, and we will get as close to that as we can without destroying the viability of schemes. And based on what we've done so far, I'd be disappointed if the 13,700 doesn't come out with at least 40% affordable housing. I think that would be reasonable to anticipate.
Although the target is 50% for publicly.
Over time, we will certainly try and get closer to 50%. And indeed, there may well be sites where we can, deliver considerably more than 50%. So, if there are, social housing sites or sites that are controlled by housing associations or other charitable organisations, for instance, then we'll be looking to do better than 50%.
So I'm listening to you. I don't think you can give a commitment that it'll be 50%. That's your aspiration.
Yeah.
But you think realistically it'll be between somewhere between 40 to 50?
Well, we will certainly do our very best to do that, and that's a key priority for us, is to keep the levels of affordable housing moving upwards, not downwards.
Great, thank you. And David, just finally, I want to congratulate you for the work you did for the good causes. It's disgusting that in this country we have people living on food banks in the current day. Thank you very much for what you did.
Thank you.
Assembly Member Russell.
Thank you, Chair. At the plenary meeting on the 11th of November, you stated that the new local plan includes provision for at least 30% of redevelopment space to be green parks. Now, can you confirm that this figure includes the existing green space at Wormwood Scrubs?
No, it doesn't. No, it's 30% of all the new development. So the Scrubs is entirely separate.
Okay, and so that the green space that excludes Wormwood Scrubs, do you know what the area covered is for that?
Well, by a process of deduction, our core development area and what we call the Western Lands, not the whole of the local plan area, but the core development area that we're focused on at the moment is between 75 and 90 acres. So I guess it would be a roughly 30% of that.
So
I don't want to call it a definite figure, but it'll be broadly 30% of whatever that acreage is.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. And that green space, will it be accessible to people, biodiverse, climate resilient, and high quality?
Well, yes to all of that. And, we're going to be very clear, I think, that, what we don't want to see is privatised space. We're happy with private gardens, but what we're not happy with is sort of gated parks and so forth. So it will most certainly be publicly available and, carefully integrated into the public realm. And it's certainly absolutely intrinsic to our sustainable urban drainage strategy and our biodiversity plans as well.
Thank you. And then you were explaining the process to Assembly Member Dr. Sahota, and you said that there were going to be a couple of days of hearings around the 11th of January, and you're expecting the local plan to be approved in the spring. But given that it was previously expected to be approved in autumn 2021, how confident are you that that's going to happen?
Well, I think we're definitely in the final knockings now, so there shouldn't be too much more reason for delay. We needed to wait and get the planning inspector's view about whether or not he wanted additional hearings. And initially, at least, I think he was minded to say no, he didn't need an additional day or two. He subsequently decided he would, to hear those few representations that wanted to appear in front of him. And so I completely understand why he's made the decision to do that. That inevitably adds another month or 6 weeks to the timetable. But beyond that, there's no other risk other than the time it will take for the inspector to write the report. So I'd be disappointed if we're not in a position to receive his report by the spring.
Okay, so you don't see a need for sort of contingency that it doesn't get signed off in the spring?
Well, I don't want to be I don't want to be absolutely committed to this because, like so many things with regard to OPDC, we're often in the hands of others in terms of key decisions. But as I say, I don't see any particular reason why that should be a risk. But clearly, it's not for me or my colleagues to control that. Others, in this case, the planning inspector, will take the time they need. But I don't think there's any reason to be particularly concerned beyond springtime.
If it didn't get signed off in the spring, are there any particular issues that would cause for you that would need you to take any particular steps?
No, I don't think so. I mean, frankly, it would have been really helpful if we'd had an adopted local plan by now, or very shortly anyway, because we will be submitting our strategic business case into government this side of Christmas. Now, clearly, that business case rests on the assumption that we've got a local plan that's going to support those objectives. I don't think it's the end of the world that that's not completely locked down at this stage, but it would have been nice to have got the sign-off and said, well, that's no longer a risk. But we are where we are. I don't think it's mission critical.
Okay, thank you very much. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you. We're now moving on to capital funding, which is going to be taken by my colleague, Assembly Member Hirani.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, David and Jasbir, for coming to the committee today. Firstly, I think I'll start off with a question to David, but feel free to come in if you have anything to add. On the Mayor's spending review submission, it included a request for the OPDC for additional funding in the region of £250 to £300 million. What was the basis of this figure?
So I mentioned that we have been working on our strategic business case, which is almost ready to be submitted now as a formal document into government. That's taken a view about what we think is required in terms of overall funding to bring the project forward. Now, that's where that 250 to 300 million came from. It's a combination of what's likely to be required for some early essential infrastructure works and land acquisitions, including potentially acquiring some of the public sector sites. What I would say, though, is that, depending how particularly any of the public land comes into a long-term deal, that figure could come down quite drastically. I mean, if we have to pay up front for any public land that may come into an arrangement, then that's going to be a capital cost that needs to be triggered very early. If, on the other hand, the value of that land is effectively treated as a long-term investment, and so there's a return as the project matures, then that capital funding requirement could change. So those are some of the issues that we still need to resolve at the government end. But the figure itself is derived from a lot of technical work, looking at site values, looking at infrastructure requirements, and so forth.
And have you taken into account maybe some of the figures that we're seeing at the moment around inflation? They seem to be at high levels, and I think we've experienced in the last decade certainly as well. And then also other cost pressures such as cost of building materials, getting goods and supplies to the site as well. Because it was quite interesting to hear you talk about costs the other end and the fact that the land values may not be at the commercial value because you're buying it from the public sector, which could mean a saving. But actually, if you start to look at costs on the other side, have you taken these into account when looking at your figures?
Yes, we have. I mean, we've made some, I think, fairly prudent assumptions about build cost inflation. I mean, clearly it's not, it's partly a science, but more of an art perhaps to look at sort of 30-year cash flows, because that's really what we're looking at with a project as complex as this. But we've taken a prudent view about build cost inflation. We've also taken a prudent view, I think, about values as well as costs. So, we're not assuming that there's some huge increase in values relative to cost over the period we're talking about. And we've had our cost estimates and value estimates derived and validated by, professional teams, including Savills, who are, pretty switched on and knowledgeable about these things. So, I mean, look, I mean, when you're trying to look at a 30-year, 35-year cash flow on day one for a project that's very complicated, you're not going to get the numbers precisely right. But I think we've got a ballpark figure that should stand us in good stead for the position we're in at the moment, which is to articulate and hopefully get agreed the strategic business case that is really then the sort of first stage in, moving through to getting, legal agreements and funding agreements locked into place.
And the government's comprehensive spending review didn't really give didn't give any time really to the OPDC's asks and requests. So how are things generally going in terms of, or moving in terms of conversations with government departments?
No, and I mean, to be honest, I wasn't expecting the spending review to say anything specific about Old Oak. That would have been nice, but I don't think anyone was really anticipating that the Chancellor would be as specific as that at this point in time. The discussions and the work that we've been doing with colleagues in government, I think, has proceeded really, really well this year. I think it's been one of the big successes, actually, that we've developed our strategic case, not sort of huddled away in a corner, OPDC doing all the work. We've done it in close collaboration with colleagues across government, with a view to, taking them through the process of building that case, and hopefully then, they can then understand, certainly at senior official level, why we're making the case we are and what sits behind it. So when that strategic case goes into government in a week or two's time, it will have the input and, I don't want to say agreement, because officials are clearly bound by what ministers eventually decide, but it certainly had supportive input from senior officials across what's now called DLUC and DFT and the government's Infrastructure Projects Authority. So that's been really, really successful, I think, and very helpful. In terms of the spending review itself, well, there is a new fund that we're not quite clear how it's going to be organised yet, but there's £1.8 billion of brownfield funding available for housing schemes. We know that that's going to probably be quite competitive. It would be nice if it were a bigger fund, but we also know, I think, that inside government and within government agencies like Homes England, Old Oak Common enjoys a particular status as a case study and a potential priority project for investment and support. Now, as I say, I will caveat that by saying there is no agreement with ministers at this point in time, but I think we've done everything we should have done and could have done with officials to try and get us to a point where ministers are able to make a decision about how to move things forward.
Okay, and at the plenary meeting last month, you said that very shortly you would have a strategic outline business case in front of government and ministers. So has this now been submitted to government, and what are your key asks?
So no, as I said, we haven't submitted it yet, but we are finalising it literally over the next few days with a view to submitting it this side of Christmas.
Okay.
And it will cover primarily the case for an organised arrangement or transfer into a single agency of the government and government agency land holdings. I mean, that's the really important building block for the new strategy. It will also surface these points about the need for a funding deal, which may take the form of, a substantial amount of money to purchase that land, or it could be a more modest sum if the government were to decide that it wanted to treat that land as a long-term investment position rather than a short-term receipt. So those are going to be the key themes in that strategic case.
And what will be the timescales for delivery?
Well, we've got a local plan target of 13,700 homes, as you know, in the next 10 years. Our plans that are informed by the strategic outline case are a very important part of that 10-year target figure. So we would certainly want to see a lot of that investment coming forward to enable us to deliver that. I should add that, of course, a number of those sites are not going to be ready for development for a number of years because they're HS2 construction sites. So until High Speed 2 have concluded their, tunnel boring through to Euston and the Midlands, and they can then start to vacate some of those sites, they're not going to be available for final development. But we think that there's opportunities to bring earlier sites particularly from Network Rail actually, and also some additional sites forward very quickly, which are subject to a separate funding bid to the Mayor's Land Fund that can enable us to get, certainly we think, 2,000 to 3,000 homes constructed in the next 3 or 4 years.
Okay, and what level of family-sized homes are assumed?
Well, we've not made any specific assumptions at this stage in terms of particular sites, because we're not really at that stage. What we have got is a very clear view that we want to do more to increase the proportion of family housing over time. The proportion of, I think at the moment, the proportion of 2-bedroom units is at 45%, but the proportion of 3-bedroom units is much, much lower. It's only around 7%. And we would like to do more on that front. Now, obviously, we'll be aware that comes with all sorts of viability issues. The other thing I would also say is that if you do go down to site at the moment, you will see for yourselves that at the moment, a lot of it is quite a stressful environment because of the sheer level of construction activity and noise, disturbance. It's not, frankly, an ideal environment, some of it, at this point in time for families. It's probably more suitable for people, that don't have youngsters that need to cross very, very busy and quite dangerous roads. That will change as the construction activity starts to fall away in a few years' time. But certainly for the moment, we need to be quite careful, I think, about where we organise the family housing as opposed to the housing that's really designed more for singles and childless households.
And in terms of the document itself, will this committee be able to review the document or any other committee at the Assembly?
Well, certainly, our intention would be that the document ought to be published. It may well be that we will need to make some redactions because some of it will involve, commercial sensitivities around, particular site valuations and so forth. But certainly subject to the views of government colleagues, because they'll need to give us a view as well. Our intention would be to certainly share that with Assembly members.
Okay. And have you made an assessment in the document about the level of infrastructure that's needed to support development and how much this would cost?
Yes, we have. We've got a detailed infrastructure plan, which I'd be very happy to share with the Assembly, perhaps at some point, if you wanted to have a more detailed and thorough discussion around the strategic outline case and, some of the assumptions we've made in that document, then I'd be very happy to come back in the new year and share those.
Thank you, Chair. I think we should definitely take that forward because we need to see what's in it. But also, I'd like to also thank you for the work that you did supporting families across the pandemic, especially I think around where the OPDC area is in on the Brent side anyway, around towards Harlesden and even towards Church End, especially in the first wave, where we experienced the highest death rate in the country. I think the families there will highly appreciate that support given in food aid.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think families would also really appreciate family-sized homes wherever they are, because some poor souls are crammed into 2-bedroom flats. Even if there's busy roads outside, as you say, things will change, and they are desperate for homes. So I'll put that plea in. We're on to our last section now, and it's of land acquisition. It's my colleague, Caroline Pigeon. Assemblymember Pigeon, please.
Thank you very much. Now, you've already touched on some of this, David, so I've been trying to listen very carefully to what you've been saying, and this outline strategic business case, in it, it's got about how you're organising the management of the land, and it is really complex. We know that. We've been asking you about this for many years, but what I want to understand, you talked about discussions with government officials. Can you outline a bit more about those discussions with High Speed 2 and Network Rail? And Transport Committee recently went out to High Speed 2. I've seen the scale of development. My goodness, I wouldn't want to be living in that at the moment. My goodness, but the potential's there. Can you just talk to us about those discussions as they're key players in there, and maybe then from that also outline, you talked about there are different levels here. You could look at buying the sites, and there's a commercial value to those which are in there, but also about that sort of long-term gradual investment. Could you talk about where the sort of balance, whether you can give a hint of where you think it might go?
Yeah, I'll do my best. I mean, as far as Network Rail's concerned, they have a number of currently redundant assets in the area, as well as potentially considerably more. And the final decisions around what they are likely to release is dependent on the conclusion of their freight studies review and various other pieces of work that are currently going on. So I'm hopeful, ever the optimist, that we will shortly get a final view from Network Rail about what they're likely to release beyond the sites we know that they can currently release because they're non-operational at the moment. So that's Network Rail. Network Rail are also, I think it's fair to say, pretty relaxed actually about the principle of a transfer of those surplus assets to OPDC. Mm-hmm. Certainly in the discussions I've had with Network Rail's property director over a number of months or years now, that principle has not caused any issues or difficulties. So on the Network Rail side, I'm reasonably confident that subject to them concluding their studies, we can bring those sites forward. HS2 is a lot more complicated in some ways because clearly those sites that they occupy under license agreements or legal agreements at the moment because of the construction of the railway. First and foremost, absolutely reasonably, HS2 are not going to want anyone to interfere with that if it's likely to interfere with their construction programme. So, if the principle of a transfer of those assets into some sort of single agency, let's call it OPDC, is agreed by the government as the sponsor of HS2, then I think it's almost certainly going to come with a very clear precondition that either those sites don't actually come over until that construction activity is concluded, or if those sites do come over, they will need to come over with some very clear legal agreements about the terms. That's HS2. HS2 is a bit more complicated for those reasons. Quite where it will all land with government and how they choose to kind of address this, it's really difficult for me to say because what we don't have at the moment, frankly, beyond a rather historic memorandum of understanding which dates back to 2015 between the then Mayor Boris Johnson and DfT, which for various reasons is still helpful, but it's no longer as valid as it was. Beyond that, we don't actually have a view from government at ministerial level to the principle of a single landholding arrangement. So if the strategic outline case can establish that principle, then I think we get into the mechanics of how it happens, when it happens, who's in charge, what's the conditionality around it.
And in terms of some of the work you've done in your case, have you looked at projects like Crossrail? Because I think in terms of their legacy and the work they have done, they talk about the missed opportunities for the oversight developments and the revenue that the public could have got from that. Is that something you've been able to put into this proposal, or business case that you're putting to government?
Yeah, very much so. I think, we all know, don't we, that the history of major transport investments, taxpayer funded, is littered with a failure to actually extract the long-term value, sometimes even the short-term value, never mind the long-term value. And it just feels really important when you've got, I think, the largest single construction project that government has ever invested in from a transport point. I don't think there's ever been a single site project probably as big as Old Oak Common Station. It's, I think, £1.7 billion. And you've seen it. It's absolutely colossal. It's the largest single site station ever constructed in the country, ever. It would be, I think, tragic, really, to waste the potential to really create long-term value, long-term public benefit, and, as you rightly say, long-term revenue income for the taxpayers, either the taxpayers that have funded it or the people who live and work locally.
Okay, so obviously want to hear about the business case, and you've offered to brief us on that in the new year. If it goes ahead, either whichever way this is cut, but you get that agreement, when would you anticipate the land being available for that sort of development?
For what? Sorry, I lost the last.
For development.
Oh, for development.
When would the land actually be available? Because obviously, yes, high speed too. You've got but you know, in your planning, you must have an idea of stages of this.
Yeah, well, certainly some of the sites, and I mentioned maybe some of the early Network Rail sites should be, you know, there's no obvious reason why they shouldn't be available very quickly. So, for instance, one of the early residential sites is what we call Oaklands. It's a big Notting Hill Genesis scheme, which is almost entirely complete now. There's a Network Rail site immediately adjacent, which is no longer operational. And that could come forward now really very, very quickly indeed. So, I mean, that's an example of a site where it would be reasonable to get an agreement for a transfer and get the site to the market probably within a year, 18 months. That should be realistic. And subsequently getting building activity happening perhaps a year or so later. As I've already said, I think for the HS2 work sites, inevitably that's going to be dependent on them releasing those sites from construction activity. But again, you know, one of the points we've made in our strategic case is that if we can get an agreement now to the principle of organising that land as a whole and get some early investment for essential early infrastructure, then what we can start doing now is all the prep work, which means that when those sites are released, they're ready for development rather than spending another 2 or 3 years getting them ready for development. So I think even though those sites are unlikely to come forward until, let's be honest, probably the late 2020s, the late, you know, probably not for another 8 years or so. You know, we need to start planning now to make sure that they get into development more quickly than they otherwise would do.
So how confident are you? We've talked about confidence a lot today, but that you're going to secure this sort of arrangement around land and to help you with that. And if it doesn't happen, what's your plan B?
Well, I don't think you can really kind of get involved in regeneration projects like this unless you're a bit of an optimist. You have to be optimistic. I don't think there's any good reason not to continue to feel optimistic. I think, you know, it's probably less easy to be as entirely optimistic as it used to be, given that we know that funding is tight and we know that with the priorities around support for the regions and levelling up, London's probably going to have to fight a little bit harder for its corner. On the other hand, you know, I think that there is honestly no bigger inward investment or housing opportunity in London at the moment that I'm aware of that's not already kind of under development, if you like. This is, I mean, you were talking to LLDC colleagues a little earlier. I mean, you know, this is a project that's on a scale, you know, maybe it's not as big as the Olympic Park, but it's certainly on a similar scale to something like King's Cross or the earlier phases of Canary Wharf. And it seems to me that, you know, with the fundamental problem already cracked, in other words, who's going to pay for the transport, that's not a problem here, you know? I mean, you remember, I mean, Vauxhall, Nine Elms, Battersea, how long did they struggle getting that one away? Because no one could figure out how to pay for the Northern Line extension. We haven't got that problem. We've got plenty of transport infrastructure. We just haven't got the land and some of the earlier funding that we need. And finally, I would say the reason for optimism is that the government is already a principal stakeholder here, you know. They are the investors in the station, you know, the biggest single investment in transport infrastructure project that I'm aware of for many, many years. And they are also the owners of the bulk of the development land. So, if you like, you know, this is a project where they are already front and centre. So, it would be disappointing if they were not to use their own resources and their own investment to do the optimum thing.
Okay, thank you. The plan B?
Oh, plan B. Well, I suppose the answer to that is it would ultimately be dependent on what the government came back and said. If they just said a flat no, you know, we're still a planning authority, we would still try and influence development. But But it would be a matter for the mayor, wouldn't it? I mean, we'd have to go back and ask the mayor what he wanted to do in those circumstances.
Okay, lovely. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Anybody else? No. Okay. That brings you'll be relieved to know, I guess, to the end of our questioning today. I think there's some other things that we need to pick up, which we'll send you a letter about just to draw those to a conclusion now. Thank you very much. Thank you for attending this afternoon and for your answers to the questions. Can I ask the committee to note the report and the discussion? Thank you. Can we also delegate authority to me as chairman in consultation with the deputy chair and party group lead members to agree any output arising from the meeting? Can I ask the committee to note the quarterly monitoring reports? Can I ask the committee to note the payments over 250 report? Thank you. Can I ask the committee to discuss any issues arising from the Mayor's decision list for the period 27 August 2021 to 4th November 2021? Thank you. Can I ask the committee to note its work programme for 2021-22? Thank you. And the next meeting of the committee is scheduled for 9th of December, that's tomorrow, 2021 at 10 a.m. in committee rooms G020304 at the London Fire Brigade headquarters. I have not been notified of any other business, so I will close the meeting.